Investor, educator, and author Robert Kiyosaki has changed millions of lives all over the world. His book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, has been on the New York Times bestseller list for over 5 years. We all know that the gap between the haves and the have-nots is growing, and Social Security and Medicare are in a financial mess. And just affording to live is getting expensive. So how does a person get ahead financially? The answer is raising your financial IQ and having your money work for you. Here's Robert Kiyosaki with Rich Dad's Teach to Be Rich.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You're very kind. Thank you. Please take your seats. Thank you. May I see a show of hands? How many people have already read Rich Dad, Poor Dad? Good. Thank you. Has anybody not read it? Oh, good. There's still a few customers out there. I'm glad to see that. I'm not going to be talking so much about Rich Dad, Poor Dad today, but I'm going to be on this program. But I'll be talking about this book here. It's our latest product called Teach to Be Rich. And in my opinion, it's a whole new direction for Rich Dad and men out there. I'm glad to see that. Anyways, we're going into trying to do our best to solve what I consider to be a massive, massive financial problem, not only in America, but throughout the world here. And when you look at the globe here, my personal concern is this growing gap between the haves and have-nots. And all throughout the world, no matter where I go, there's always people who are rich in every country, but there's also the poor, and there's also those that are, struggling financially. So this product, Teach to Be Rich, is really designed to help solve, and there's many causes of the problem, but one way of solving that problem is through education. So that's what this Teach to Be Rich product is about. And if I could explain what's happening in our school systems, there's many types of education, like there's music education, health education, cooking education, stuff like this. But to be successful in today's complex world and getting more complex world, we need 3 types of basic education. And one of them is academic education, which is reading and writing and arithmetic. It's very important that you be able to read and write. The second type of education is professional education. And when I was in school back in the 60s, if you did really well, you were A's, then you went to become a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant. Since I wasn't an A student, I didn't go to those professions and things like this. But and these two are very important. My poor dad was a man who really thought this was all you needed. He kept saying, go to school so you can get a high-paying what? Job. And that's all my poor dad thought I needed. My rich dad, who was my best friend's father, he said if he wanted to be successful, he needed financial education. And unfortunately, as many of us know, our school systems teach us very little or anything about financial education. So I'm not saying that these are not important. I'm saying that today, just going to school, just to get a good, be able to read and write and have a job, is inadequate. What I'm saying today, in today's complex world, we all need financial education. So what this course or this program is about, and this Teach to Be Rich program is about financial education. It doesn't mean to negate any of this here. So if I could go into, I did graduate from high school and go on, and my professional education was, I learned to be a ship's officer. So I drove tankers for Standard Oil of California. And I also flew aircraft for the Marine Corps, U.S. Marine Corps. So I was a pilot in Vietnam. So I've had 2 professions. But I've never used any of them, very simply because my rich dad taught me this here. And the way my rich dad began, at the age of 9, began teaching me financial education was really simple. He just started playing the game of Monopoly. I remember as a kid, 9 years old, I'd go to my rich dad's office. I'd say, you going to teach me you're rich? He goes, sure. And he'd break out the Monopoly board game, and we'd sit there and play for hours. And he'd tick, 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 tick. How many people in this room have played Monopoly? Good. And I sat there, and then I'd go home, and I'd say to my poor dad, the school teacher, I said, guess what I did today? I said, I played Monopoly. And he goes, oh, what a waste of time. Put that silly game away and do your what? homework so you can get a good, safe, secure what? Job. So here, my dad saying Monopoly was a waste of time, and my rich dad saying this is a brilliant game. So I kept going back and forth, and that's why I'm schizophrenic today, because I don't know the difference. But the difference here is this: I keep playing this game of Monopoly, and then I go home, and my poor dad would say it's a waste of time. So one day I asked my rich dad, I'm only 9 years old, I said, why do you say this is so important? So he actually took me out, and he showed me, this is in Hawaii where I was growing up, he showed me what were the representations of his 4 green houses. He'd sit there like that. I said, what does this mean? He says, well, the formula for great wealth is found on the Monopoly game board. And most of us know the formula. 4 green houses, 1 red hotel. 4 green houses, 1 red hotel. So it started to dawn on me at the age of 9. My rich dad was playing Monopoly for real, and my poor dad, a school teacher, PhD, thought it was a waste of time. And so I was really quite confused. So then at the age of 9, it goes fast forward, at 19, I go to school in New York. I went to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy in New York. I got a congressional appointment for that. So I come back from school in New York. I'm now 19 years old, and my rich dad has bought the big red hotel smack dab in the middle of Waikiki Beach. And suddenly I went, holy mackerel, he's done it. In 10 years, he went from a poor man to a rich man playing Monopoly. And meanwhile, I go back to my dad, and he's still saying, be sure you get good what? Grades, and get a good what? Job. And that's why the whole difference is spanned. So one of the reasons I was able to retire at a relatively early age of 47, and my wife was 37 when she retired, was not because of what we learned here. And again, I'm not saying this is important. I'm saying it was because this is also important today. So at the age of 47, I retired very simply playing Monopoly. And today, I still play Monopoly. I think it's a really fun game, So my concern, and the reason I created this Teach to Be Rich program is because, as I said, all across the world, there's a growing gap between the haves and have-nots. The good news is, people in China and India and things like that, many of them, their standards of living are coming up. But the poor are still poor. And that's not that healthy. So if I show you a diagram here, this here is the year 2000. And this is why I'm concerned. In my opinion, and many economists and other people would disagree with me, right now the U.S. looks like this. You have the rich, and you have the poor. Okay. And this is the U.S., but it's a worldwide problem. And in here, you have the great middle class. My concern is that by the year 2020, and it's just going to start in a few years, it's going to look like this. In a few years, due to a lack of financial education in America, I predict that there will be more rich, and I intend to be one of them, but there will also be more poor. There will be an increasing number of poor. How many people know family or friends or co-workers who have nothing set aside for their retirement? Good, thank you. And that's what I'm concerned about. And what I'm really concerned about is this, I've been going into it as time goes on, is one of the reasons this problem happened is very simply because our school system still teaches us nothing about money, and people like my poor dad, a school teacher, always said the government should take care of you. And our problem right now is in America, from presidents on down, there are millions and millions and millions of people who are on the government handout. I mean, Clinton is on the government handout, every senator is on it, military officers, firefighters, soldiers, and everything. They're all on this government handout. And what I'm concerned about is America, which is a great rich country, will soon become a very poor country. Does that make sense, you guys here? And the reason we become poor is simply because we have so many people, not just poor people, expecting the government to take care of them. The concern here is this. This here is the middle class. And these are the guys that are going to pay for these guys here. Does that make sense to you? And I can hear some of you saying, well, it's not my problem because I'm still young. How many people in this room were born after 1964? Good. I want to thank you because you're the ones to be paying for my retirement. And these are the people that pay the taxes. So the reason I created Teach to Be Rich here is very simply because I predict, and I could be wrong, like in the next 20 years, even though it's a worldwide problem of this gap between the haves and have-nots, even in the richest country in the world, in the next 20 years, we're going to see a transfer going this way. So you'll see more rich people in America, but you'll also see more poor people. And in my opinion, what got us into this problem of this so many poor people in the richest country in the world is because we have a lack of financial education. In my opinion, the way out of the problem is also to increase financial education. So the reason I created this product here, again, I'm not blaming school teachers. It is a system of education that has not, supported this here, and I think it's by design here, that we need this. So I'm asking every one of you at home and in this audience today is to consider it, is to learn to teach other people to be rich. And the reason we created this product is because I became a rich person by teaching. I've been teaching now since 1980, and but not in the school system. I wouldn't work for that pay scale. And I make millions of dollars a year as a school teacher. But the main reason is not so much to make myself money. The main reason I found teaching to be one of the best professions of all, and I didn't come across my profession until I was 40 years old, because I hated school. I found school the most boring, inhumane place. I didn't know I was stupid until I went to school. I said, what do you mean I'm stupid? So I would not create a product that is like the school system. For years I have practiced and learned how to make education more fun. How to make it more entertaining, how to make it more effective, how to make it so the person learns something rather than sits there bored, stiff, and falling asleep all the time. So that's what they created this product for, but in the positioning statement on this book it says, why teach to be rich? So regardless if you're a teacher or not a teacher, if you have a sincere desire to help solve this problem called growing poverty in America, but also desire to help yourself and help your family and your friends, because I suspect this is a very big problem. But the reason this Teach to Be Rich works is because the best way to learn is to teach what you want to learn. How many people ever found that out? That if you wanted to learn how to play golf, one way is to teach other people to play golf, except if it's your wife. You never do that. That's rule number one in golf. Don't teach your wife to play golf. But anyway, one of the best ways to learn is to teach. And the second reason for this product is, and the best way to get rich is help other people to get rich. Does that make sense to you guys here? So this is a product. It comes in basically 3 different parts. Number one, I'll go into the macroeconomics, because although I didn't do well in school, I did like history. And I studied history, for some reason I really enjoy history. And that was one of the only few subjects I got A's in. The second part of this book here is, it's about education, is how we learn. And again, I'll say it, I would not ever ask anybody to teach the way our school system teaches. It is the most inhumane, boring way to learn. It only works for about 20% of the population. How many people are ever bored in school at times? How many people ever wondered, why am I studying this? Everyone wonders, how am I going to use this in the real world? Right? Well, this book sort of answers it. So this is a very practical book. So number one, it's about history, how we got into this problem. Number two is some of the lessons I learned after 25 years of teaching, how to make it more effective for more people, more fun. And number three in this program, you'll be meeting my real advisors, the people that really are the A students around me. It's like I said, one of the things I learned in school was the best way to get smart is sit next to the smartest girl in class, but the teachers always called that cheating, at test time. Like this. But in the real world, that's called cooperation, and stuff like this. So later in this program, you will be meeting some of my real advisors. And again, as the introduction said, your financial advisor may not want you to look at this program. And the reason they may not want you to look at this program is because in this program, you will learn that some of the best financial advice is bad financial advice. Like the advice of work hard. How many people are told to work hard? How many people are taught to save money? Good. For those of you who think saving money is interesting, stay tuned. You'll find that's one of the worst, most risky investments you can do. 3 is invest for the long term. Or get out of debt. How many people have heard get out of debt? Good. You'll find out the people that win are people who are debtors, and savers are losers. And the 4th thing is invest for the long term. How many people have heard that one? And how many people heard the word diversify, diversify? Good. In this program, you'll find out why that is very bad financial advice. But the only reason it's good financial advice is because most people don't have this. It's good financial for these people. Save money, work hard, get out of debt and all, but not for these people who have this here. So that's really what the program is about. My concern, again, is, like I said, right now in the year 2000, we have a strong middle class, the economy's booming, housing prices are up and things like this, but it's going to start shifting here. And the main reason it's going to start shifting is, if we can go to the plasma up here, there are 5 major macroeconomic events that are starting to happen right now that may cause America tremendous problems. Number 1 is cheap oil. America has boomed up to this point because oil was cheap. Number 2, funny money. What I mean by funny money is the US dollar, after 1971, became the reserve currency of the world. The US government can print as much money as it likes and the world will take it. As long as the world will take it, we're okay. But the moment the world says we don't want this monopoly money anymore, it's toast. So there's a great book for those who have any questions on funny money. It's written by a friend of mine, Richard Duncan, and it's called The Dollar Crisis. And he goes into explaining why the US dollar, how it got to be the most powerful single currency in all the world. We have never been here before, ladies and gentlemen. We have never been here where there was one currency that dominated the world. And the problem with it, the federal government is printing it faster than any of us could ever save it. And so that's why I say funny money is going to change and it'll only change if the rest of the world says we won't accept it. And already the petrodollar countries like who have oil are now thinking about not accepting the US dollar. If that ever happens, we're toast. They'll start taking the euro and other currencies. If that happens, everything as we know it as this economy crashes, or at least changes. So that's why this book here, The Dollar Crisis by Richard Duncan, is a very important book to read. The 3rd reason why I'm predicting this is going to happen right over here is right now America has a very young labor force. The baby boomers, one of the biggest booms ever hit. It's worldwide. In America, there's approximately 75 million baby boomers. In 2008, which is only about 2 years away, the first baby boomer starts to retire. Number 4, China and Russia were communist back in the year 2000. Now they're capitalists. You have no idea what that means. You have no idea, because the oxymoron is something like military intelligence, postal service. Well, the oxymoron is Chinese communist, because I grew up in Hawaii, and most of my friends who are Chinese, they are not communist. My Chinese friends are all capitalists. They're some of the smartest money guys I've ever met in the world. In fact, Hawaii is owned by the Chinese today. They're so smart. And now that they're coming on, in 2001, China was allowed to enter the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and they're coming on strong. Russia's coming on strong. Eastern Europe's coming on strong. What that means for all of us here is this idea of a safe, secure job with benefits, like the transit strikes and all that. It's toast. If you're thinking right now that you can keep getting a pay raise, think again. Because the guy that's competing for your job now lives in China, India, or Russia. That's the problem of the world right now. And the 5th point, America is rich. Up to 2000, we're the richest country in the world. Will we continue to be that? I don't know. There's a good possibility that we might become, right now we're the biggest debtor nation in the world, and the only reason we're the biggest debtor nation in the world is because funny money. So I'll just summarize right now is the main reason I created this book is because we're making the shift right now. And I am concerned not only for myself and my family and my friends, but I am concerned about you. I wish I could say this book would help everybody, but obviously it can't. Because some people, when it comes to money, will never change. My concern here is this, that the middle class will be decimated by higher taxes. For those of you born after 1964, there is a prediction that your Social Security taxes alone will go from approximately 15% to as high as 50% just to cover all the old guys with no savings or retirement here. So I created this book, Teach to Be Rich, so that you can teach yourself and possibly your friends and loved ones, and hopefully some of you can make it out of here and into this category here. And that's why this book was created. Thank you very much.
Investor, educator, and author Robert Kiyosaki has changed millions of lives all over the world. His book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, has been on the New York Times bestseller list for over 5 years. We all know that the gap between the haves and the have-nots is growing, and Social Security and Medicare are in a financial mess, and just affording to live is getting expensive. So how does a person get ahead financially? The answer is raising your financial IQ and having your money work for you. Here's Robert Kiyosaki with Rich Dad's Teach to Be Rich.
So welcome back, and before I go into Teach to Be Rich, the program, I thought I'd give you a little bit of my background on Rich Dad, Poor Dad for those who may not have read the book. For those who may not have read the book, because my name is Robert Kiyosaki, it sounds like Kawasaki. I wish it was Kawasaki. I'd be a worthless playboy in Tokyo spending daddy's money, you know. Anyway, I'm fourth generation Japanese American, which means I don't speak Japanese, or at least that's my excuse. And the reason I say that is almost in self-defense, because a lot of people have studied Japanese, and they come up to me at the breaks and go, "Hi, yes, ho, yo, yo, yo," and I go, "I have no idea what you're talking about." You know, I barely speak English and things like this. Anyway, so I was raised in Hawaii, went to school in New York. Interesting thing is, this book has now been on the New York Times bestseller list for over 5 years. Only 2 other books have been on that list longer, and one of them is The Joy of Sex, which I don't know if I'm ever going to pass, but anyway, it's a tough subject to compete against. But the reason it's kind of interesting that it's on the New York Times bestseller list, you know, because anybody who makes the list for 1 week is considered good, but 5 years is almost unheard of. But as I flunked out of high school twice, simply because I couldn't write. And it's not that I couldn't write, my teacher did not like what I was writing. And as I said also, my father was the head of education for the state of Hawaii, and to have the son of the superintendent of education flunking out of high school, you know, all the teachers were in the background, you know, laughing. So I flunked out when I was 15, and I flunked out when I was 17, again for the same reason, because I couldn't write. And it was not that I couldn't write, the teacher disagreed with what I was writing. You know, so the definition of, I learned very early on that the definition of intelligence in school is, if you agree with the teacher, you're intelligent, and if you don't, you're an idiot, you know, things like this. So I rarely agreed, especially because I had 2 dads, because my poor dad always said, go to school and get a job, and my rich dad would say, you won't get rich that way. So that was kind of the paradox. My rich dad was my best friend's father, and although he was a man who started with nothing, he became one of the richest guys in Hawaii. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad is this very simple story of what 2 fathers tell their sons about money. And as you know, for those, how many people were told, go to school and get a job? And what my rich dad said, that's not the way you do it. So the book has been fairly controversial, but fundamentally what this book is about the subject of accounting and financial literacy, and why the rich are getting richer. That's what this book is about. And the reason I mention accounting is I did go to business school for about a semester, and what I boring flunked out on, again, was accounting. You know, it was the single most boring subject I had ever studied. You know, I used to wake up in accounting class, and my print was all blurred. And the reason it was all blurred is because I was drooling on it, you know, things like this. So for me to have written a book on accounting is quite, probably my accounting teacher and my English teacher are just, that guy, he did it again, So that's why I'm really happy to have my business partner, Sharon Lecter, as my co-author of this, because she's a CPA. So all you A students out there worry, well, how can you write a book on accounting? My co-author is a CPA, so that's how it's covered here. Okay, guys. The last thing about my poor dad. My poor dad was a very highly educated man, great guy, and he also ran for lieutenant governor of the state of Hawaii. And he ran as a Republican, which proved he wasn't that smart. But the reason I say that is Forbes magazine calls Hawaii the People's Republic of Hawaii. And it's been democratic for years, except until just recently. So my father was courageous enough, which I really respect him for. He was courageous enough to run against a very corrupt government, a government that believed in stealing and giving to themselves, And it's still, as we all know, that's part of government. And it's take from the taxpayer and give to your friends. So my dad actually had the courage to run against the governor. And because he ran against the governor in the 70s, the governor said he'll never work in the state again. So I have a tremendous love and respect for my dad because he's a man who stood up for his principles. The other thing, too, is I went to Vietnam twice, once in 1966 and then in the 1970s. And the reason I went to Vietnam was even though I was draft exempt because I was working for Standard Oil. If you work for oil, you don't have to go to war. And I think that's funny, personally, but anyway. Anyway, so I went to Vietnam because both dads, my rich dad and my poor dad, said it was a son's duty to fight for his country. So both my brother and I went to Vietnam twice. And I flew helicopters in Vietnam. And when I came back from Vietnam, that's when I decided I was going to listen to my rich dad and not my poor dad. Because my poor dad always said to me, go back to school, get my master's, get my PhD. And I said to my dad, what? Go get my master's and my PhD? He says, yeah, and then what? He says, then get a job with the government. I said, Dad, I think I'd rather go back to Vietnam. It's more honest. Anyway, so that's what Rich Dad, Poor Dad's about and all this. So going on, I'll quickly go into what my rich dad taught me, and it's really quite simple. Again, it goes back to my rich dad focused on financial education. And what he said was the key to being rich had nothing to do with money. He says what made a person rich or poor was their vocabulary or the power of words. So very simply said, he said that words either made you rich or poor. And he said the problem with education is that each of us as human beings has command of about 2 million, well, the English language is approximately 2 million words total. And each of us has command of about 5,000 words, that's all. So if you want to increase your wealth, simply increase your vocabulary. In other words, do you know the difference between ROI and IRR? There's very big differences. Or when your stockbroker says the earnings are up, or EBITDA, what does that mean? You know, I won't go into it, but EBITDA really, from my point of view, doesn't mean anything, but my stockbroker always throws it around like it's some big deal. It doesn't mean much to me, but you have to know what it means and does it mean. So vocabulary or words make you rich. So once again, I'll say it. When somebody says it takes money to make money, that is not accurate. It takes words or vocabulary. And like when I was in Sunday school, I heard, the words from Sunday school that the word becomes flesh. And that's how powerful words are. So my rich dad also forbade us from ever saying the word I can't. Like my rich dad always said, poor people always say I can't afford it. He says the reason poor people are poor is because they use their brain or vocabulary against them. He says you listen to poor people, they always say I can't do that, or I can't afford it. He says it's not that they can't, it's very simply they're not willing to. They're too lazy. I can't is a cop-out. So he forbade his son and I from ever using the words can't, and instead of using the words can't, he says, how can I? So like, how can I make $1 million? How can I become a billionaire? Not that I can't, or how can I afford my new Maserati or Lamborghini or a Porsche or house? Does that make sense to you guys here? So the most powerful piece of real estate, or the best asset you have, is actually your mind. And what fuels the mind are words. So going back to words and all this, this is an income statement and a balance sheet. This is the basis of accounting. And we'll go into why accounting is so important. This is also a financial statement. So a financial statement is made up of 3 distinct parts. One is an income statement, which says income and expense. The second is balance sheet, which is assets and liabilities. And there's a third document that's also important. It's called the statement of cash flow. And my rich dad used to say this word cash flow was one of the most important words an investor needed to understand, was where was the cash flowing. So there's 3 documents. My poor dad, because my poor dad always said to me, he says, our house is an asset. How many people have your parents that say that to you, or you say asset? And my rich dad would say that's why he's poor, is because he may be a PhD in education, but he is not very smart financially. He says he's using the wrong word to describe his house. So very simply, it goes back again to words. And my rich dad said assets, the definition of an asset is something that puts money in your pocket regardless if you work or not. So this is the cash flow pattern, this here, of an asset. So whether you work or not, it's putting money in your pocket. And a liability, then, is something that takes money from your pocket. So repeat after me. Assets put money in your pocket. What do assets do? Put money in your pocket. And what do liabilities do? Take money from your pocket. So think about this right now as you sit here. As you're sitting here at this moment, and you at home think about this, how much money is going out of your pocket whether you work or not, and how much money is coming in if you work or not. And that's the test. Is money coming in or money going out? Most people, the reason they have to go to work is because money is going out, because they have so many liabilities they think are assets. And that is the big problem here. So very simply, I'm not saying don't buy a nice house and all this, but the reason the middle class is in trouble, they keep buying bigger, bigger houses, and then as the price of the real estate went up, they keep using their house as an ATM machine. You know, it's $100,000, they pull more money out, home equity loans, pay off credit card bills. And the world says that's really smart because you're now paying off your credit card bills with your house. I mean, that's moronic because all you're doing is increasing the liability. Does that make sense, you guys here? Hello, you say that? That's very important. So the reason my wife and I were able to retire early and my rich dad got richer was he very simply kept buying more houses and properties and businesses that put money in your pocket. So I ask you to think about this right now. How many things you have are assets? In other words, if you, and let's say you're married, your spouse stopped working, how many things keep putting money in your pocket? And if you stop working, how many things keep taking money out of your pocket? That's what you know an asset or liability is. When I was in Singapore, I asked that question. I said, how many of you have good assets? And this woman raised her hand and said, I have an asset. I said, what is that? She said, it's my husband. He's a great asset, you know. Every month he makes lots of money. I said to her, I said, ma'am, I'm talking about a non-human inanimate object. And she says, that's my husband. So the point here is this, I'm not pushing real estate. Anything that puts money in your pocket, we'll be discussing some of those things that put money in your pocket. For example, you know, most people, their car is a liability. But if I use that same car as a taxi, that same car could then be an asset, okay? Well, we look at these books right here. Is every month or every quarter, Warner Books sends me a royalty check because they're selling my product for me. So this here is an asset also. Does that make sense, you guys here? Because it's putting money in my pocket. So that's very simply the difference. Okay. So that's the picture of assets and liabilities. Now, the big test here is this. When a banker looks at, you know, the bank, when you go to see your banker, as my rich dad said to me, my banker has never once asked me yet for my report card. My banker has never asked me, he said, Robert, did you have good grades? How many people have ever had your banker ask you for your grades? Some of you have. Interesting banker. My banker has never asked me what school I went to. When you go to see your banker doesn't really care about how academically smart you are. What they want to see is how financially smart you are. And the only way a banker can measure your financial IQ is by looking at your financial statement. Now, if you don't have a financial statement, and a lot of people don't because they don't know what it is, then they ask for a credit report. And I don't have a credit report because I have financial statements. If you're going to play the game of money, you really do need to have financial statements. That's a very big difference here. If you don't have financials, it means that you're not serious about money. So when a banker looks at your financial statement, this is your report card. As an adult. So a banker looks at it like this, and let's say they see here's a person A comes in, and the cash flow looks like this. I mean, money in, money out. The banker knows this person is a poor person. I'll say this again, it has nothing to do with money. It has to do with cash flow patterns. So I have a friend in Phoenix, he's a doctor, he makes about $400,000 a year. The trouble is he spends $400,000 a year. How many people know people like that? And he's really proud of it. He's a doctor. He says, but I have no debt. I rent, and I paid cash for everything. So he doesn't really have anything. He just goes out. He can't stop working, even though he makes $400,000 a year, because the cash is flowing out. So whether you're a poor person has nothing to do with how much money you earn. It has to do with how you spend your money, and that's the key. When you ask most bankers, they want to know how you manage your money, how you expense it. Poor people, very simply, spend money on poor things. And the middle class spends money on middle class things, like a nice house or a nice car. And what the rich spend in are investments or other companies and things like this. So it has very little to do with your income. It has to do with how you spend your money. So the next thing is this. The middle class, what they have is a big mortgage generally. And the word mortgage, again from the word mortgage comes from the French word mortier, which means death. So most people are in debt until they die. That's something what it means here. And then they have the nice car, they're looking good, and they have huge credit card debt, home equity loans, student loans, and all this. So their cash flow, the cash flow pattern of the middle class looks like this. So the banker looks at this and says, this person's nice middle class, good credit rating, they'll pay off their debt, but they'll never be rich, so I won't lend them much money. Okay. And then the third pattern is somebody who is rich, and they may have, number one is a business, then they'll own real estate, and then there's paper assets, there's the stocks, bonds, and things like that. And for me, there's royalties. And this is the cash flow pattern of the rich here. So one of the difference between the rich, the poor, and the middle class is very simply where the cash is flowing from. So those of you sitting at home right now, think about it this way. If a banker looked at your financial statement, looking at your cash flow, looking at your report card or your financial IQ, what's a banker going to say? Is this person poor, middle class, or rich? The reason the reason I could retire early was very simply because I have assets putting money inside here. That's very simply it. I don't have mutual funds. I don't have a retirement plan. Got that? So I know this makes a lot of people crazy because many people think their house is an asset and it's a great investment. So I'd like to explain why I say that is not accurate for me personally, because most accountants would say your house is an asset and all of that stuff. But I think that's more easily explained when you look at the cash flow quadrant here. The quadrant is my other book, and the quadrant stands for E, S, B, and I, and E stands for employee, S stands for small business or self-employed, B stands for big business like Bill Gates, and I stands for investor. And what the quadrant is about the four different people that make up the world of business. When we go to school today, most people are going to school, go to school to get a job, and our school systems are programming our minds to be employees. Or if you're a really smart person, you go to school to become, a professional person, so as people say, something you can fall back on. So these are the doctors, lawyers, or restaurateurs, small business people, and all this. My rich dad programmed me or trained me to be a business owner like Gates or Oprah and things like this, and I stands for investor. One of the reasons so many accountants disagree with me here is because most accountants, what are they? E's, S's, B's, or I's? Most accountants are E's and S's. They're not professional investors. So what I say to people is this: as a professional investor, I must live and die by not my commissions or my fees or my brokerage deals. I must live and die by my cash flow. Every month the cash flow is coming in. It's not a lot of money, but several $100,000 a month comes in whether I work or not. That's because I'm an investor. So I'll say this: it's due to a higher standard. So most accountants disagree, but most accountants are over here, and most accountants are passive investors. Most accountants have 401ks with stocks, savings, bonds, and mutual funds. If you're going to listen to this program, I'm going to take everybody to a higher standard. I'm not saying you have to go there. I'm just saying it's a higher standard. So going back again into the words here, the two words that I think are very important to understand right now is the most important word I said is this word here, cash flow. And this is cash flow. This is cash flowing into my pocket every month. Like I said, several $100,000 every month whether I work or not. And my expenses are very, very low. Most of them just keeps coming in here. And the second type of reason, second reason people invest is for capital gains. Now, capital gains, what that means here is that you buy, let's say, a stock or a piece of real estate, and the price goes up. So let me show you this. This is cash flow, and this is capital gains. 90% of the investors invest for this here, hoping the price will go up, or capital gains. And that's why so many investors think investing is risky, because they have this little crystal ball, and they're asking not investors, but salespeople or employees of big Wall Street companies and all this, what do you think the market's going to do? You think it's going to go up next year? Or if you're in real estate, I bought this house for $100,000. It went up to $200,000. Should I sell now and all this? They're playing crystal ball stuff. And those are people for capital gains. I do this occasionally, but primarily I invest for cash flow. And as I said, it's a higher standard. It is harder, please hear me, it is harder to get cash flow. This is easy. This is a walk in the park. The average person will buy a house and say, I bought a house for $500,000 and it already went up $100,000. I said, how do you know that? So my broker told me. Does that make sense, you guys here? It's BS, blue sky. It's not real. But that's where most people are. It is really tough to get cash flow. I mean, from my experience, I have to work really hard to get cash flow. I have to be a better investor. So the reason most accountants say your house is an asset and all this stuff, or this is fine according to generally accepted accounting practices, GAAP accounting, is because most accountants and brokers, salespeople, are over here. But if you're going to play over here, it's a higher standard. So the reason people say your house is an asset is very simply explained like this. When your banker says your house is an asset, you have to look at this. A financial statement there have to be two of them. You can't just have one. So let's say you're Mr. and Mrs. Middle Class and you buy yourself a house, and what you have here is a mortgage. Like I said, mortgage comes from the French word mortir, which means death. There it is. Now, for something to appear in the balance sheet, it must balance. So you can't have this balance on the same sheet. The only way it balances, it can't balance on your sheet. It has to balance on somebody else's financial statement. So your mortgage shows up on your bank's financial statement over here. Same mortgage. So over here, it's a liability, but over here, it's an asset. And so when your banker says to you, your house is an asset, your banker's not lying to you. The banker's just not saying whose asset it is. It's their asset. The way you know that it's an asset, again, going by the litmus test of this here, very simply, assets put money in your pocket and liabilities take money from your pocket. That's the test. That's the true definition of the words. You must use the right words. So my poor dad used the wrong words. He called his house an asset when it's really the bank's asset. So what happens here is the money comes in, hits the mortgage, it comes out the expenses, goes here, goes in here. I mean, it still doesn't go here, it goes straight up here. So the cash flow here is flowing out, which makes it a liability, but the mortgage over here is flowing in over here, which makes it an asset. And that's how you know. When you look at a regular financial statement, this is the most important line right here. Not how much money you earn, but the income coming in from your investments. That's what I'm looking at here. So that's the reason why I invest for cash flow and not for capital gains. Capital gains is gambling. It's gambling. When somebody says, oh, I better get in and start buying because prices are going up. I don't care if it's stocks, bonds, real estate, gold. It is the most stupid thing you can do is invest for capital gains. It is gambling. But that's what 99% of the people do because they've never been trained to be investors. They don't invest over here. every month, I must have cash flow because I am a professional investor here. Does that make sense to you guys here? Where the passive investor, I'm an active investor, the passive investors are this. It's called this here. Oh, I hope the market goes up. I hope it goes up. It's going up. Oh, yes. You watch CNBC. Oh, market's going up. Oh, the Dow's up today. Oh, good, 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 good. Yeah, loser. Yeah, geez. There's nothing wrong with capital gains. When I invest, I first invest for this, and second, I want this. In other words, I want both. The average person is just happy with one. But to get both, you have to be a better investor, and most of these people haven't got the financial training to do that. So that's why accountants and lawyers and all that will say, well, don't listen to Robert, or especially your stockbroker will say, don't listen to him, or your real estate broker says, oh, don't listen to him. You can't get cash flow off of real estate. You know, because they're brokers. They're broker than you are. They need the commission. You know, they're not living off of, they're living off of, most brokers are living off of commission here. Whereas an investor is living off of cash flow here, and the gamblers are going for capital gains. And that's how you can see it. Once you can see it all the time here. So the last thing is this, don't just take my word for it. This is what Warren Buffett says about people who invest for capital gains. They hope the price is going to go up, uptrend stuff. Warren Buffett says the dumbest reason in the world to buy a stock, and this applies to real estate or anything, or gold or oil, the dumbest reason in the world to buy a stock or anything is because it is going up in price. That's what it means. And what Buffett is saying here is that most people are investing for this, where if you really want to be a professional investor, you're investing for cash flow. So one of the reasons I created Teach to Be Rich here is very simply because once a person gets into one of these patterns, it's really hard to get out. It's like a rut. So before a person, can change anything, they've got to change, what's behind their ears. Or if I could say, is this, as I said, I can tell whether a person's going to be rich or poor by their expenses really, really quickly. Poor people simply buy poor things. Whereas I was answering a question earlier, I was talking about, as a rich person, what I buy first are assets. I don't buy liabilities. My assets buy my liabilities. For example, when I wanted to buy another Porsche, I bought a piece of real estate, and the cash flow from that real estate pays for my Porsche. What the middle class, and the reason they're middle class, is the first thing they buy is lifestyle things. They want the nice house and the nice car. I have gone without eating, and I've gone without the nice house, because assets are number one here. And so what makes a person rich, poor, middle class is what is number one for them. For the poor, number one is just pure survival. For the middle class, it's looking good, keeping up with the Joneses. And number three are assets. And when I talk to a person, I can tell really who they are simply by what they're buying, but also what it shows up here. So the reason, again, for creating Teach to Be Rich, as well as a cash flow game, is they are designed to bust up the patterns inside your head, because if you don't change the pattern, nothing really changes there. So moving forward, again, because our school systems don't teach us much about financial education, we learn that at home from our parents. So on the plasma screen over here, you're going to find out what the poor teach their kids about money. So the poor, like my poor dad really sincerely, he thought, I'm a good man and the government should take care of people. How many people know people like that? The government should take care of you. And so that's why he believed in a government job. He believed in, Social Security, and he believed in Medicare. But as I'm saying, the reason I created this Teach to Be Rich program, as you're going to see by the end of it, is the debt for a number of people, starting with the president on down, expecting to be taken care of, is going to wipe out a great country like the United States. But as I said, it's also a problem throughout the world, because all over the world, the rich are taking from the poor, actually, through taxes and things like this. So that's what the poor believe in. And what the poor person is, as I was answering your question, is the poor are basically non-investors. Poor just simply believe the government's going to take care of me, or the company's going to take care of me. And that's why they're poor. They have a very poor financial mindset. It doesn't mean they don't make a lot of money. My poor dad made a lot of money. He was a very high-paid government official, but he never invested it because he thought investing was risky. And you'll find out in this program that investing is not risky. The second group is the middle class. What they believe in, this is their financial education, a good education, a high-paying what? Job, a big house. Your house is your most important investment and asset, and they all believe in that. And a pension. And a pension either comes from the government or 401k or something like that, and those people are basically they're passive investors. So they invest, but they turn their money over to somebody they hope and pray is smarter than they are. And unfortunately, most of the time they aren't, because they're turning their money over not to investors, but they're turning their money over to people who are salespeople, not investors. And what the rich believe in, this my rich dad taught me, is number one, he says, be an entrepreneur, like Bill Gates and Oprah, and be an investor, an active investor like Buffett or Trump. So what Teach to Be Rich is about is for people who want to understand how to be entrepreneurs and how to be active investors, not passive investors. So that's what this program is really designed for. If you still want to put your money in a 401k and all that, this may not be the program for you. But stay tuned, because I think you'll find out that the 401k or those pensions or mutual funds or stocks or savings or bonds are the riskiest of all investments. And that's what happens to passive investors, where active investors want higher returns with less risk. So one of the problems with being a passive investor is that so many people come up to me and they go, I have $25,000, what should I do with it? And the first thing I say is, if I were you, I wouldn't tell anybody you have $25,000. Because if you don't know what to do with your $25,000, there's a lot of people that do, you know. And generally what they're going to do is tell them to put it in their pocket. And this is what this program is about here, is many times the people giving out financial advice are not rich people, but salespeople. This is what Warren Buffett has to say about financial advisors. And this is on Warren Buffett says, Wall Street is the only place that people ride to in a Rolls Royce to get advice from those who take the subway. And that is my experiences. So as this program rolls on, you'll be hearing that the idea of work hard, save money, get out of debt, invest for the long term, and diversify is really bad financial advice, highly risky financial advice. So that's why at the start of this program I said, you know, be careful, because your financial advisor is going to say, don't watch this program, because this is the advice they give. My rich dad said this. He says the reason they're called brokers, like stock brokers, real estate brokers, insurance brokers, is because they're broker than you are, you know. And they have to live on their commissions and things like this. There's nothing right or wrong with it, because I still use brokers. The problem is most people do not know, because they're passive investors, because there's no financial education, they don't know a good investment from a what? Bad investment. They don't know a risky investment from a safe investment. They don't know a good advisor from a bad advisor. And that's what this program is about. It is designed not to sell you any investments, but hopefully to improve your financial intelligence, your financial IQ, to make you a better investor and make better investment decisions. Thank you very much.
Investor, educator, and author Robert Kiyosaki has changed millions of lives all over the world. His book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, has been on the New York Times bestseller list for over 5 years. We all know that the gap between the haves and the have-nots is growing, and Social Security and Medicare are in a financial mess. And just affording to live is getting expensive. So how does a person get ahead financially? The answer is raising your financial IQ and having your money work for you. Here's Robert Kiyosaki with Rich Dad's Teach to Be Rich.
So welcome back, and I'm going to be moving into now a little bit of history, but also why the world is changing so much. So a very important year is 1974. And the reason 1974 is important is, according to my opinion, it was a shift when America and the world shifted from socialism to capitalism. Now, I know most people think America is a capitalistic country, but it's really highly social in that it believes in the government should protect and take care of people. And now moving to capitalism is changing. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying it's changing. But 1974 was the year I came back. I got out of the Marine Corps after 5 years as a pilot in the Marine Corps. And I went to my dad. And as I said before, I asked him, what should I do with the rest of my life? And my dad said, go back to school, get your master's, get your PhD, and get a job with the government. And I went, oh my God. So at that point, I went to Waikiki to see my rich dad, and I said, what should I recommend? But the saddest thing about 1974 when I talked to my poor dad was very simply, my poor dad in 1974 was saying, go back to school with my PhD so I could get a safe, secure job. And my dad was unemployed. He was about, 1974, he was about 50 years old. And the reason he was unemployed, like I said before, he ran for lieutenant governor against his boss, the governor. And the governor said to my dad, you will never work in this state again. In other words, you will never get a job here. So here's my dad. He did all the right things except stand up for his conscience and run against a corrupt government. And at that point, he never got a job again. So that's why at that point I knew I'd better listen to my rich dad. And I went to see my rich dad, and I went to see him, and I said, I want to follow in your footsteps, not my poor dad's footsteps, and I want to be an entrepreneur and an investor. In other words, I didn't want to go over here with my PhD. I just wanted to come over here. So he said, I said, I'll be an entrepreneur. And the first thing he said to me, he says, if you're going to be rich, you're going to be an entrepreneur, you must learn how to sell. And that was my first real awakening to the real world. He says, if you can't sell, you'll never be an entrepreneur. He says, that's what entrepreneurs are doing all the time. And I had this really negative block because my family, being school teachers, thought that salesmen were the scum of the earth. I had to go against my family's biases about salespeople, and I got a job with Xerox, and for 2 years I was the worst salesman Xerox had. And then 4 years later I was #1 in sales and things like this, so I learned that. But that's why 1974 was so important to me. But even on the world scheme, 1974 was important because that was the introduction of a thing called ERISA. And ERISA stands for Employee Retirement Income Security Act, which led to, back a few years later, to a thing we now know as a 401k. This came out about 1980, so 74 to transition to that. And I think the primary reason I do this Teach to Be Rich and all this stuff, and I created the Rich Dad Company, is because of this act over here. It is one of the biggest changes that we have had in the world today, but very few people have taken notice of it. Because the 401k is a very significant little investment type of vehicle. The reason the 401k is so important is because it is probably the riskiest of all investment vehicles. You know, your banker won't lend you money for it. You can't get insurance on it. And not only that, it only will work for about 20% of the population. If you're making less than $150,000 a year, it is doubtful whether the 401k will provide enough income for you when you need it. So the reason the 401k in 1974 is so significant is that why this is important, like I said, was the shift from socialism to capitalism, 1974. But what it signified was this, was that the companies, the big corporations, were no longer going to take care of the employees. That's what it meant. Up until this point, my poor dad had the right idea. Go to school, and the company and the government will take care of you. 74 was so important because basically the big corporations were saying, employees are too expensive, we're not going to take care of anymore. So we're not going to protect the employee. So the employee suddenly had to come from here to over here as passive investors. And they have no financial education, which is really why I'm upset with the school system, because even though the world changed, our school system still teaches us very little about money. And I always say, you know, rich or poor, smart or not so smart, we're all going to use money, so why doesn't the school system teach something about money? But even though the 74 change happened here, nothing happened. And that's, like I say, how many years is that? 25, 30 years ago that change happened. Our schools still do not teach us anything about money. But this is what's happening in America today. USA Today did a survey, and they found Americans' greatest fear is running out of money during retirement. And that fear is now caused by this 1974 change, because people now realize that a 401k is not a pension. A 401k is now a savings plan. And the difference between a pension and a savings plan is this, is pensions will take care of you for your rest of your life. A savings plan will only take care of you as long as you have money in the account. So that's why USA Today found the greatest fear is that. Then the Fox network did the same survey. They wanted to find out what the greatest fear was. It said, is terrorism a greatest fear or retirement a greatest fear? And what Fox found out, these are approximate numbers, Fox News, they found out that about 22% or 26% thought that terrorism, Al-Qaeda, was the greatest fear. 60% thought that running out of money was the greatest fear during retirement. And the reason that is happening, again, for this change right here. And so that's why I created this book, Teach to Be Rich here, and all this, is because there are millions of people who are afraid of running out of money during retirement because our schools haven't picked up the slack of the change of 1974. I believe it is this law change that the reason I created Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the Rich Dad Company, the Cash Flow Games. And in the year 2002, I wrote this book here called Rich Dad's Prophecy. How many people have read this book here? Good, a lot of you have. It's not as popular. This was not a very popular book because this book was written about the 1974 change. And all of my predictions in this book, many Wall Street companies came after me. Many magazines came after me. They absolutely trashed this book. They called me a quack. I didn't know what I was talking about. But it is, I think, not the most popular book, but the single most important book for many people. So, again, this was 2002. And then in 2005, 3 years later, the New York Times says the same thing that prophecy says. Exactly the same thing. So this is 2002, this is 2005, and it says here, we regret to inform you that you no longer have a pension. That basically what they're saying is that these people after 1974, pension plans became one of the biggest sources of funds for the rich. They just take money out of it, and the middle class and the people who put money in there don't get anything inside of it. So this is the New York Times, October 30th, 2005. Then October 31st, 2005, Time magazine said the same thing. It says, the great retirement ripoff. Again, saying the same thing my book in prophecy said 3 years earlier. And it says here, millions of Americans who think they will retire with benefits are in for a nasty surprise. How corporations are picking people's pockets with the help of Congress. That's what these articles are about here. So they say the same thing prophecy says here. This is 2005, this is 2002. So that's why I created this product here, Teach to Be Rich, and my cash flow games, is because of this right here. Because what has happened in the world is so many people then, because of 1974, were forced to become passive investors. And I'd like to show you on the screen what the difference between a passive investor is and an active investor. So number one, a passive investor, one, they have no control. And this whole talk is about control. In the next segment, I'll go into what control really is. Next is higher risk. They invest in the highest of risk investments. The highest risk investments are savings, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. They're the riskiest of all investments, but most people think they're safe for some reason. And you'll find out today that they're the riskiest. Number three, the banker will not lend you money for your 401k or mutual funds. If your banker doesn't trust them, why should you? That's the test. Don't believe my word, ask the banker. Number four, insurance agents will not insure your 401k against losses. As a real estate investor, I'm not pushing real estate, I had one of my buildings burned. Thank God nobody was hurt, but the insurance company replaced it and replaced my rent and all this. I never invest without insurance, but millions of people, due to that 1974 change, moved over here as passive investors. They have no insurance, and they're putting their money into investments a banker would not touch. Number 4 or 5, higher taxes. The 401k is one of the least tax efficient of all investment vehicles. 401ks only work if you're planning on being poor when you retire. The reason I don't have a 401k is I plan on being rich when I retire. Because when I put money into my 401k, when I retire, let's say at age 65, when I pull the money out, it comes pulling out as ordinary income. If I have a lot of money, ordinary income is one of the most highest taxed of all incomes there is. It doesn't make any sense for me because I make so much money, I might be paying 40, 50% tax on that money. I'd rather be in real estate where I can pay 0 tax. That makes more sense to me. So that's why I don't have a 401k. And this is all part of the financial education. I think they should tell kids early so they don't take a job with a 401k and do something else. Number 6, they always worry about market crashes. You know, they're always worried about it, and they're always asking their financial planner, you know, what do you see in the future? You know, the stock's going up, stock's going down, prices coming up, prices going down. You know, that's gambling. That's not what I do. Number 7 is they have very low returns. This book, Unconventional Success, is written by a man named David F. Swenson. If you don't take my word for it, take his word for it. He's a chief investment officer for a company called Yale University. This guy's a very smart guy. It's a great book. But he says this, that mutual funds have not done any returns over the long term. The reason I'll go into a little later on, the reason mutual funds have not had high returns is because the fees they take out of them. I'll be going into that a little later. So if you insist on investing in paper assets, I would buy this book here because it's a great book. But he goes into why investing for the long term in mutual funds absolutely makes no sense, even over the long haul, because there's almost zero returns in them. Not zero, but very low returns. Number 8, the plan can run out of money. As I said, the problem with the 401k is not a pension plan, it is a savings plan. Number 9, you may never retire with a 401k. As I said, the 401k might work for about 20% of the people. As long as you're making over about $150,000 a year, it will not work for those making less than that because you just can't put enough money aside. And that's one of the problems with that. So those are some of the challenges. And what I'll show you the comparison now is between an active investor and what makes an active investor different is that an active investor, number 1, has control. That is the whole crux of this course here. Financial education, financial information means you're taking back control. What people are doing is right now they're going around saying, I got $25,000. What should I do with it? What should I do with it? You know, they don't have any control. Number 2, they're a lower risk. And I'll go into why the risks are lower if you're a passive investor. Number 3, I use my bank's money, OPM. One of the ways you get rich faster is don't use your money, use somebody else's. Number 4, I use insurance. I don't invest without insurance. I have to have some kind of escape valve in there in case I'm wrong. Number 5, I may pay 0 taxes. One of the reasons I love real estate is I got the biggest tax breaks, and it's fabulous. I mean, I can make millions of dollars and pay 0 in taxes. Well, at least defer. Number 6, I welcome market crashes. Most people are afraid of market crashes. Like, I can't wait for the next market crash because that's when I'm going to buy again. The passive investor lives in fear of crashes. Number 7, there's unlimited returns, and I'll show you a couple examples where I get infinite returns. Number 8 is that I can provide for generations because my wealth is just constantly recurring. I can pass it on for kids, all this stuff. Number 9, I may retire early, and I retired at age 47 because I had financial education and no job. And so those are some of the differences right now. So with that, I'd first like to bring up Scott and Michael come up. Michael's my attorney. He's the author of OPM, Other People's Money. And Scott McPherson and I did this tape, is How to Get Your Banker to Say Yes. So, Michael, would you give a little bit of background on this book here real quickly?
Question for you. You find a great deal. In order to get into that deal, you need $1 million. You don't have $1 million. What are you going to do? Do you walk away from the deal? The answer is a resounding no. You use other people's money. There are lots of different forms of other people's money. Scott will talk about some of them. There are different requirements for the different forms of other people's money. Some of them, different types of other people's money will be more applicable to different types of deals. This book is about that. Now, when you bring in other people's money, do you necessarily have to give away the store? There will be a cost. Okay? Again, the answer is a resounding no.
Okay.
Okay?
So the point here is this, is one of the skills I had to learn as a young man was how to raise capital. It became one of the most important skills. So many times people say to me, well, I can't afford it. They find these great deals, but they go, I can't afford it. Rather than say, how can I raise the money. So one of the things that makes the rich richer is I don't use my own money, I use other people's money. What my rich dad said to me, he says that only lazy people use their own money. So when somebody says, well, when do you use your own money? The only time I use my own money is when the deal is so good, I don't want anybody else in it. When the deal is shaky, I use other people's money. That's generally the rule of thumb there.
Now,
right?
Nobody is saying that money is going to magically appear. But we will tell you that if it is a good deal, you can always find the money.
Even if it's a bad deal, sometimes you can find money. So,
this is true.
Yeah, thank you. And so Scott McPherson is my banker. Anytime I have any questions on how to raise money or on especially real estate, I mean, this is my man. He is my banker, and he and I did this CD audio program is how to get your banker to say yes. But before you go talk to the audience here is, as a banker, do you lend money for mutual funds?
I do not.
Why not?
The primary reason, and you hit it on your screen just a second ago, is lack of control and too speculative and too much of a risk. And if I could, Robert, for just a second,
Sure,
I'd like to show you an interesting scenario. In this particular case, it doesn't matter if it's a single-family home or an income-producing property, where we place a loan on the asset, we may loan 80, 90, 70%, maybe 100% of the value of that asset. Because it's a tangible asset, it makes sense, there's income and cash flow. For example, let's just say I'm the bank at that point. However, if you were to go buy my stock and I'm the bank and you were trying to borrow money to buy that stock, you may be able to get 50% maybe on a margin account to buy the stock of the bank that just loaned 80 or 90 or 100% on that single family home or whatever the asset was. So the difference is, in my mind, is you have something that has cash flow and control and a manageable risk that you can wrap your hands around going back to my stock, which I'm the one who loaned the money over here, but if you were to buy my stock, now you lose control, much higher risk because I'm making good or bad decisions, who knows, and the best you can do is probably borrow 50% of the value of that stock invested. So,
No.
Okay, now let's say that Scott's only willing to lend up to 75% of the value. Are you out of the deal? No. You bring in a different type of other people's money. You bring in co-venturers, partners. You put up part of the money, they put up part of the money, you make some other contribution. Let's say you tie up the deal. You have an intangible right to purchase this asset. You think in terms of forming a business. Your contribution is that intangible right, and perhaps part of the money.
Okay, so Scott, let me ask you this question. As a banker, Michael's an attorney, Scott's a banker. Do you want to lend money?
I want to lend money because, as we saw earlier, when I loan money, that's an asset to my bank. I also want to help you do what you want to do, but you have to help me get to that level and get me comfortable that you're able to borrow that money and pay me back, because that's really what I want. But I don't make a dime unless I make a loan to you. So I do want to loan money to you.
Right, and so many people are afraid to come and talk to you, right?
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
So what Scott covers in this, how to get your banker to say yes, is how to prepare to see your banker. Because a banker's job is to say yes, because you don't make any money if you say no.
No, that's correct.
Okay. So let's have a hand for this gentleman. Thank you very much. Here. So, in conclusion, I want to say really quickly up here, I'll just show you how this whole thing works. If you're playing the game of Monopoly, this is what a banker does. This is Monopoly. You buy one greenhouse, it's putting cash flow. Monopoly teaches you this right here. The difference between cash flow, it took it to the next level of understanding this. I'll just show you how unrisky, if you're an active investor, is. Like, I don't like savings, stocks, bonds, mutual fund, because the risk is so high. My banker won't lend me money on it. This is a land deal that Kim and I just did a few months ago, and it's really quite a simple deal. And when somebody says things are risky, I don't know where the risk is. It's 10 acres of land. The price was $100,000. The reason I use this example is most people can afford $100,000. Okay. Now, The reason I bought this property is very simply when I looked at the listing agreement, again it goes to the words, it had the two letters MH on it. Now there's a lot of land around this thing. That what made this land more valuable than the rest? What made it more valuable was the words MH. MH stands for manufactured housing. When I saw that, I dropped to my knees, again broke out the rosary beads and said thank you. Because the words made this more valuable than all the other land around it. Why that made it valuable is that because manufactured housing means, let's say I could break 10 acres into 50 lots. And I sell each lot for $25,000 each. The stepped up value on my property then is $1.25 million. How many people would pay $100,000 to make $1.25 million? That's how simple it is. Where's the risk? You know, and the reason I say it's an infinite return is the moment I found this deal, naturally my friends who can't find a deal wanted me to give me the money. So let's say I gave them the money, so I have zero money into it. I give them half the deal, which means I make about $500,000. So I make $500,000 on zero of my money. I use other people's money. And that means my return is infinite. Does that make sense, you guys here? Nothing to that. I don't know where the risk is. So when people say to you investing is risky, generally it's one of these people over here who is not an active investor. This is done all day long. It took Kim and I about 20 minutes to find this thing. We saw it there, bam, done. It's not a big deal. It's not a Donald Trump deal. But $1 million is $1 million. You can still spend it that well. And the last thing, more real life examples, is this my wife Kim did, is that she found a piece of property not far from our house. I think Scott helped finance this one. It's a commercial building, and it was so undervalued that they wanted $8 million for it. Because it was undervalued, we borrowed 100% of the money. And the reason we borrowed it was very simply because every month this property put $30,000 a month cash flow in our pocket. Again, this is not a big deal, but $30,000 a month, you can live on that much. You know, it's not that bad. But the reason I use this deal as and we do about 1 or 2 of these a year. And it's not that hard to do. But the beauty of this is the banker gave us all the money here. It took us, like Michael says, 2 different levels of financing to do it. So we got 100% financing. Now, the reason I say this is to all the people who are the savers of the world, I ask this question: how long would it take you to save $8 million? And one of the reasons the rich are getting richer is because they know how to use other people's money or debt to move forward here. So it's not $8 million for the savers. A saver would have to save approximately $16 million to get this kind of level, because the government's going to take 50% of it. The beauty of using debt financing or equity financing, things like this, is please listen to this, all you savers of the world. You're not going to get ahead by saving. A people who is borrowing and understands how to be a professional investor, it took my wife 2 weeks to find that money. And I asked the average saver of the world, how long will it take you to save that much money? For most people, $8 million or $16 million might take a number of years. Okay. And then the deal's gone. So the moment Kim found this deal here, she just tied it up, and that was the money. So the savers lose, the debtors win. And that's one of the big differences of learning how to use other people's money, how to have a friend like Scott McPherson or Michael Lecter on how to borrow money and things like this, because the savers are losing big time right now. So before we go into the next subject, I want to bring up my one of my best friends, but also my investment partner in real estate, because you know the question I was asked during the break is how does a person find a deal that cash flows? And I hear that a lot from people, especially now that people are coming into the market late. But there's still millions of deals around that you can find that cash flow. So before I answer that question, I'd rather bring up my business partner here, is author of the ABCs of Real Estate Investment. It's Ken McElroy. It's a big hand for Ken, please. This is his book. Why don't you give a little bit of your background before we go on?
Sure. Well, like many of you, I started off investing in one single-family home and condos primarily, and then eventually started buying larger and larger properties. And I've been in business for a little over 10 years. We have two construction companies, two management companies. We're developers. We have a short-term housing company and a realty company now that feeds our company, which we bought last year about $150 million worth of real estate for all different kinds of things. We develop it, we buy it, we enhance them. We're doing some condo conversions all over the West Coast. So primarily that's what I do now. I have a large presence throughout the West. We have about 250 employees now and offices throughout the West Coast. And my partner, Ross McAllister, primarily handles the construction, and then I handle the management operations.
So this is my question to Kenny, because so many people say, well, how do you find a great deal? And the reason is that there's a difference between a passive investor and an active investor. Passive investors, because they're basically, either they cannot see the deal, or they wouldn't know a good deal if they saw it, or they're basically lazy. They just go to the broker, the financial planner or somebody says, do you have an investment for me? And naturally they do. It's generally mutual funds, stocks, or bonds, and they're always readily available. Real estate is different because you have to really look, or even in stocks you have to look really hard. So my question to you is this, is how many deals do you look at a week?
We probably I personally look at least 30 a week, probably. I look at 4 or 5 a day, I bet. And they take me anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes each because I know what to look for.
Right. And how many of them are bad? 30.
30.
And I think that's the biggest difference, is that to find this deal over here, I probably looked at 100 deals, and then one day I stumble along, and there it is, sitting there. I mean, this is what they call a no-brainer, right?
Well, part of looking at deals is part of your financial education and understanding all the different parts of the deal. And that's really where I get my education, as Robert does too. Some of them are land, some of them are retail, some of them are office, some of them are multifamily. And so through that process, you learn quite a bit when you make a phone call or ask questions. And then eventually you find something like this.
Yeah, we're looking constantly. That's what an active investor does. A passive investor just buys that junk that guy has to sell you. And most of the stuff is being sold by those financial planners. In my opinion, those mutual funds are junk. They will not make you money. They cost you money. That's why I'm not saying it's right or wrong, you guys. But I said, if you're going to be an active investor or a passive investor, you really need to make that decision. And active means you're constantly looking at deals, constantly analyzing them. It's 24/7. I mean, you're still running numbers in your head when you go to sleep, right?
Well, the great part about it is no matter where I am, even when I'm on vacation, I'm looking at deals, no matter what city I'm in, and it's a blast.
Yeah. And then I spent a lot of time in Australia, and I'm always looking. And no matter where I am throughout the world, China, Singapore, Canada, Europe, South America, Africa, they always say something. They always say, well, you can't do that here. No matter where I go. You can't do that here. And the reason they can't do it is because they're passive investors. They haven't trained their brain to see. No matter where I go, I'll find a deal that I can, make it, improve it, work it, or do something like that. And that's the difference between an active and a passive investor. Anything else you want to say?
Well, yeah, that's exactly why I wrote this book, because as you'll see later on, that the fundamentals are really the same everywhere.
All over the world.
All over the world, they're the same. Income minus expenses minus debt is cash flow. It's the same no matter if you're in Hong Kong or you're in Phoenix, Arizona. It doesn't matter. And that's why I wrote this book, because it walks you through that process.
And one of the things I think is really funny is that, because Kenny his business partners are like Lehman Brothers and Goldman and the big houses. As I said, the story of the father that gave those 3 boys the money. If you know how to multiply money, the banks of the world will give you the money. Is that correct?
Well, that's been the interesting part, is my balance sheet, of course, has grown over time, but there's more money. The last deal that we did, actually, Scott helped us with it. We had 9 people bidding on our project to lend us the money.
How much was it? How much were they lending you?
I can't remember. I think it was somewhere around $50 million. And we were looking at the best deal for us. So we were looking at the terms and the rates and the payouts and things like that. as part of our financial model to decide who we wanted to accept money from.
But the reason they're giving you the money is because you know how to take $1 and turn it into 10, right?
That's right, and because we had the team behind us.
And that's really the skill a person has to learn. So many people want to do what Kenny does or what I do, but they're not willing to put the time in. They're passive investors, not active investors. And the thing that's even funnier is because Kenny's always in the marketplace. You know, we're in Scottsdale, Arizona, Kenny's developing this condo project, and everybody's crying the blues. I can't find a deal that cash flows, and Kenny has this condo conversion right on the main road in Scottsdale with the best piece of property in the Arizona area, and yours will cash flow, right, even if I buy them.
And we just bought it 2 weeks ago, 300 units.
Yeah. So one of the keys to finding great deals is you got to have friends in the industry. It's called insider trading. You know? Well, you know, in the stock market that's illegal. In the real estate market that's perfectly legal, right?
Absolutely.
So that's how I find deals. It's, again, like I said to the gentleman, it's who your friends are, who you spend your time with. If you're spending time with people over here, like accountants and attorneys and all that who are non-investors, I think you're nuts. If you want to spend over here, that's where you find the deals are, because they always tell their friends first, right?
Well, and I think it's been mentioned before, there is so much money to be given to you if the deal makes financial sense. You need to decide how it makes financial sense, and that's why I wrote the book, because it walks you through what's a good deal, what's a bad deal.
Good. Give a big hand for Kenny, please. Thank you. So again, would you take 1 minute to discuss that? Look, ladies and gentlemen, there's millions and millions and millions of dollars right in front of you. But if you haven't trained your brain because you only have academic or professional education and no financial training, then you'll always be poor. You'll always think, well, it takes money to make money, or I don't have enough education, or I'm not rich, and all this stuff. Unless you change what's up here, nothing's going to change. Like I said, this project took probably 20 minutes to spot. It's a piece of raw land. And this one was right across the street from where Kim and I live. You know, it sat right there. And the bank gave us the money for it. 100% finance. Put $30,000 a month in our pocket. And the property has gone up in value, but we don't really care, because all we really want is every month is $30,000. Why we want $30,000 a month? Is because then we're free. We don't have to work for the rest of our lives. But we can do this time and time again. But we're active investors, not passive investors. You guys got that? You got to pay your dues. Put in your homework. Or you can be lazy like most people and say, well, how come you can't tell me about that deal? If I find a great deal, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to buy it myself. Right? I mean, you should do the same thing. So please discuss that. You have to do the homework. Got that? Please discuss that really quickly. We'll move on.
Investor, educator, and author Robert Kiyosaki has changed millions of lives all over the world. His book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, has been on the New York Times bestseller list for over 5 years. We all know that the gap between the haves and the have-nots is growing, and Social Security and Medicare are in a financial mess. And just affording to live is getting expensive. So how does a person get ahead financially? The answer is raising your financial IQ and having your money work for you. Here's Robert Kiyosaki with Rich Dad's Teach to Be Rich.
Okay, moving on. How many people ever heard these words? Repeat after me. Okay, this is good advice if you have very little financial education, but it's terrible advice if you're financially educated. So let me explain how I came up, where I heard this is that I was watching this very popular morning program that goes all the way across the U.S., and they have the very good-looking couple, you know, the host and hostess, and they're saying, okay, it's the start of the year, and this time we're going to have the financial expert of planet Earth come in and give us financial advice for the new year. So, welcome, so-and-so, financial advisor, and everybody's going to hand all this, you know. So this guy pops out, and this is 1999, and he goes, okay, ladies and gentlemen, my financial advice for the new year is work hard. Save money, get out of debt, invest for long term, and the young host and hostess go, oh, that's such brilliant advice, big hand, big hand, big hand, big hand. So the next year they invite him back again, and again Freddie Financial comes popping back up there and says, what's your advice for the new year? And he says, I advise people to work hard. And again, the magical couple on the TV show, oh, wonderful, wonderful. Where does he come up with that great financial information? I just don't know where he comes up for it. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Then after the year 2000, the market started to crash. Remember that? It started to go down. And so they invite Freddie Financial back on again. They say, and welcome for the new year. He's going to give us the advice of how to handle this tough financial situation. And so Freddie Financial comes out, and one more time he says, my advice for this year is, and did this stop the market crash? No, the market kept going, and between the year 2000 and 2003, the people that followed this advice, millions of them, many people with 401ks, lost an estimated $7 to $9 trillion worth of their savings. They got wiped out. That same period, Wall Street paid the highest bonuses ever to their people. To me, that's unconscionable. But the reason it's unconscionable here is most people think that this is investment advice, and what you'll find is primarily a sales pitch. It is not good investment advice. Now, I'm not saying don't follow it. I'm saying if you want to be rich, this is bad financial advice. And what I'll be going into is why I say it's bad financial advice. Number one, when you look at work hard, the reason work hard makes no sense is because most people work hard over here. The reason you don't want to work hard here is because the more you work for money, the tax laws are written against anybody who works for money. If you're a laborer, whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or an employee, the harder you work, the more money you make, the higher your tax bracket is. So these people get wiped out. The tax breaks are over here for people who have people work for them or their money work for them. That's the big difference. Save money is the next biggest one here. The reason save money is really, really bad advice is very simply because the world changed in the world time 1971. In 1971, there was a man named President Nixon who took office. And what happened in 1971 was Nixon turned our money into currency. So after 1971, we're no longer saving money. After 1971, we started saving a currency. And the problem with a currency is a currency is just printed by the government. It's called fiat currency. And what happened in 1971 was Nixon took us off what's called the Bretton Woods Agreement, which started in 1944 and ended in 1971. Up until 1971, the U.S. dollar was actually pegged to a thing called gold. I forget the exact dollar amount, but that's one of the biggest problems. So after 1971, our school systems forgot to tell people that we're no longer saving money, we're saving a currency. And if you've studied economics, this is what a currency is designed to do. It's very simple. Over 40 years, a currency is designed to fall. Let's say you have $1. A currency is designed to drop in value to about 5 cents. So you never get ahead financially because the dollar is dropping. So after 1971, you shouldn't be saving money anymore because you're saving a currency. Now somebody can say, well, how do you know this is true? It's the reason I know this is, I'm not saying this is 100% accurate because there's other factors to it, is my father's house purchased in 1967 or something was $50,000. And today that house is now worth $1.5 million. It's the same house. In fact, it's in worse shape now. But the house did not appreciate in value. What happened is the dollar depreciated in value. So the problem with the currency is it's always losing value. Now, the other way of looking at it is this, is how much has the dollar lost in the last 10 years, is this. You look at between 1995 and 2005, the way you can tell what your dollar is worth is very simply, it just kept coming down, the dollar. And what you can peg it to, or look at the next thing, is between 1995, gold was approximately $250 an ounce, and gold today is $500 an ounce. That means your dollar's purchasing power has gone down by 50%. So you've lost that much money by saving money. Now, the reason all of this can happen is very simply because the government can print money faster than you can save it. That's why Kenny was saying there's so much more money out there right now looking for places to put their money. Yet people still save money, even though it's going down tremendously in value. The other way of looking at this is, the question is, when the president or the Federal Reserve Chairman gets on board, he talks about this word here. How many people have heard them say there's no inflation? Okay, how many people realize that things are going up in price? Okay, so the question is, how is it that our leaders can say there's no inflation? And the reason they can say that is very simply because the Federal Reserve Bank is only charged with tracking CPI, what's known as Consumer Price Index. The only thing they're concerned about is the price of consumer goods, i.e. this is consumer goods, this is consumer goods, my watch are consumer goods. Consumer good prices are coming down very simply because China is coming up. But what they don't tell you is this, is that the reason they can say that there's no inflation is because of consumer prices, but if you study basic accounting or economics, they are not charged with tracking asset value. So what's happening is asset prices are going up and consumer prices are going down. So the reason this is so important is if you look at it between 1995, oil, how much was oil in 1995? Anybody know? It was approximately $10. Today, 2005, it's about $60 a barrel. And they can say to you there's no inflation. And the reason they can say there's no inflation is because we have no financial education in our schools. We have basically a population that is financially not too smart, even though they have a good education. So they're telling you there's no inflation, but asset prices are going up. How many people right now are worried that maybe your children's children may not be able to afford a home because they keep going up in price? They just keep going up, but they have to get smaller and all this stuff. Because asset prices are going up, but consumer prices are going down, and that's why they can say there's no inflation. And that's why saving money doesn't make any sense. For one big reason, the government can print money faster than you can save it. On top of that, during this period of time when inflation was running, same time inflation was running at 50%, banks were paying you 1% interest on your money. And yet those financial advisors will tell you should save money because of the magic of compounding. Well, let me tell you, this is compounding a lot faster than this thing here. So I'm not saying that this is the truth. You know, watch the price of oil, watch the price of gold. If you see gold drop into $100 an ounce, maybe you should save money. Or the government's not printing any more money. But this is stupid. To save money when these trends are going on, it makes no sense. That makes sense, you guys here? So that's why I don't save money. I've been saving gold since 1996. The other part about this right here is this, is that between 1995 and 2005, these guys lost $7 to $9 trillion. The Economist, the magazine I subscribe to, The Economist said during the same period when those people were losing $7 to $9 trillion was the biggest financial bubble in the history of the world. That's why Kenny has made money, Scott has made money, I've made money. The reason we made fortunes is we were not in the stock market. We were not in savings. We were not in bonds. We were not doing what our financial planner said to do. We were doing exactly the opposite. And the reason it works differently here is this, is because the people that were making money, if you look at it this way, the chart, the stock market from 1995 to 2005, the stock market went like this, spiked, and went down. Same period of time, Gold, oil, and real estate went like this. So the people that were in real estate, gold, and oil, basically commodities, made a fortune. The reason that happens is this, is every 20 years the market changes. So this market here in gold and real estate should go up to about 2020 and head back down again, and then stocks will come back up again. That's basically the running trends. But they didn't tell the investors who were in mutual funds that. That's why so many people took a hammering at that time. Now the other part about it is this, the people that won were the debtors, not the savers. How many people in this room wish you had bought more real estate in 1995? How many people wish you were in debt up to your eyeballs with real estate? You know what I mean? That's the difference there. If you had bought real estate back in 1995, which is when I was buying as much as I could, that's when it took off. Also, in 1996, I started my gold mine in China, and I've always invested in oil because I used to be an employee of Standard Oil for a few months. But that's why I understand these markets. I'm a commodities guy, not a stock and paper bond, paper guy like that. So those are some of the big differences. So the thing about get out of debt, this is really bad advice. To save money and to get out of debt when the market trends are going like this is really stupid. You should be getting into debt for something like this and getting out of debt for something like this. But one of the biggest lessons my rich dad taught me was the difference between there is good debt versus what? Hello, good debt versus what? Bad debt. Very simple as this. Good debt makes you rich, bad debt makes you poor. And as I said earlier, the reason that most people in the middle class and the poor are struggling is what they spend their money on, is they're spending money on things that are in bad debt, things that are consumer items, not asset items. And that's the big difference. So I'd like to bring up, this is a very important subject because debt goes both ways. I'm going to bring up another attorney friend of mine. He's one of Rich Dad advisors. This is Garrett Sutton. Garrett is he's written 2 books. One is Own Your Own Corporation.
Right.
Well, what I want you to have you talk about is the ABCs of getting out of debt. Okay.
Americans love scores. All right. What's the Yankees score? What's the Lakers score? We love scores, but there's one score that you don't pay attention to enough, and that's your FICO score. All right. That is your personal scoreboard for borrowing money and using the credit system. And this book talks about how to maximize the system. Now on the chart there, a 450 score is low and an 850 score is high. What do you need for a 450 score? There are 2 things. Does anybody know what you need? A social security number and a pulse. All right? That will give you a 450 score. But if you have a 450 score, what kind of borrowing power do you have? 0. And you will find yourself paying more money for utilities, for auto loans, for all sorts of things you need to get by in our society today. So you need to know how to win this game. You need to know how to get your FICO score up to 700, up to 800, and then you can take advantage of our credit system.
Could I say one more thing? This
Sure.
is the most important. The reason I wanted Garrett to talk about this is one of the problems with having bad debt is you don't get good debt.
Well, and that's the point, is I want you to get out of bad debt so you can start using good debt. If you have a low FICO score, you're not going to be able to take advantage of the good debt opportunities. You need to get out of bad debt so you can get into the good debt program here that Robert's talking about and start improving your financial future by investing in real estate, oil, and commodities.
Right. And the biggest problem with people with bad debt is this, is that they think that by borrowing money in this real estate market is the way to get out of it, and they just make the matters worse. I've met so many people who are trying to get into the real estate market or any kind of market or gold when they have bad debt. I say the first thing you should wipe out is that bad debt, because if you're a moron with bad debt, you'll probably be a moron with good debt too, you know, so you want to get out of both of it. And I've been in debt, you know, I mean, I've sold people. American Express has had me on their most wanted list at times, you know, when I lost a company back in the 70s. But it was one of the best things I ever did, was really work my way out. It was almost $1 million. It was almost working my way out of this was one of the best things I ever did, because it made me appreciate this, but it also made me a lot smarter. So.
Well, and Robert, you and Kim provide the example of how you got out of debt the bad debt in this book. It's a great example. It can be done by anyone. There are simple steps you can take to get out of bad debt. Don't let people tell you, though, that it can be done in 30 days. It takes a while to get out of bad debt.
$1 million took a while. It took a while.
So the point is that you're going to use these strategies to get out of bad debt so you can take advantage of the good debt opportunities that are out there. Kenny, Scott, they both mentioned there is money out there. There are people willing to invest in good projects. Take advantage of that. Get out of bad debt, start using good debt.
Thank you. Big hand for Garrett, please. Thank you. So I said the average person who's a passive investor, they believe in saving money and getting out of debt. The next one is invest for the long term. And the reason I think that's really silly is very simply because as a passive investor, you don't know what long term means. But as an active investor, I need to know the difference between commissions versus what? Fees. And the difference here is this, is when I buy a piece of real estate, I may pay a 6% commission. But if I start investing in a mutual fund or one of those funds, I pay fees forever. So let's say I start when I'm 25 and I go till I'm 65. Every quarter or every year, I'm paying a fee to the mutual fund company. With real estate, I pay it once, and that's all I have to pay. So I don't mind a person making money, but what I object to, anybody, if they're taking fees and I'm not making any money, I think that's highly unethical. At least with my real estate commissions, I have some control over that. Does that make sense, you guys here? So one of the biggest things about mutual funds, and that's what this book says here, Unconventional Success, is the reason mutual funds don't work is very simply because they're just taking too many fees out. And the worst thing about it is that the mutual fund companies do not have to provide you with a financial statement, so you never know how high their expenses are. So to me, it's only a mutual fund company can only operate because we have financially illiterate or financially unsophisticated investors. I personally don't want to just give somebody my money for 40 years and they take a fee off of it every year. That makes no sense to me. That makes sense to you guys here? So then the last thing here is diversify, diversify, diversify. How many people have heard diversify? Good. Diversify, there's another word for it, it's called diversify, And rather than take my word for it, because I don't diversify, I selectively look hard until I find one great investment. And when I find that great investment, I strike on it. But I will not just buy a whole bunch of junk. But don't take my word for it again. Listen to what Warren Buffett says about the word diversify or diversify. He says, diversification is protection against ignorance. It makes little sense for those that know what they are doing. And he's the world's greatest investor. So that's Kenny came up here, he's looking at 30 deals a day or a week, whatever he's looking at. I'm constantly looking at deals. You don't buy every single one of them. But the thing about, the reason they say is protection against ignorance, in my opinion, is the ignorance of the person selling you the investment. And why I say that is most people selling mutual funds are on this side of the equation here. They couldn't tell you a good investment from a bad investment. So it's actually protection from them. If you diversify and the market crashes, they can say, well, I protected him. But they're also protecting who? Themselves. And that's why that I don't really support diversification. What I support instead, if you're an active investor, is this word here, is I focus. I'm looking for that deal, constantly looking for it. And what focus stands for is follow one course until successful. And what I mean by that is there's several things. Is I look until I find what I want. But also when I was learning how to be a real estate investor, I stayed with it until I was pretty good at it. And then I moved on to some other kind of investment. I don't diversify. The problem with diversification is this, is if the market crashes and you get wiped out in your 401k, your retirement plan, your financial planner will not give you a money back guarantee. So let's say it crashes when you're 55 years old. By diversifying or following this advice, you're not any smarter than when you started. You have no experience, so you cannot recover. Does that make sense, you guys here? So I'd rather learn to invest and focus and buy what I want to buy, even though I make some mistakes early on in my life, and that way I don't have to make the mistakes again. So that's a very big difference. So let me just say this much. If you have low financial education, follow this advice. Work hard, save money, get out of debt, invest for long-term, diversify. This is great advice for passive investors who just turn their money over to somebody they hope is smarter than they are. But if you want to be an active investor, then you focus, you follow one course until successful. So just say it one more time, as I did real estate for a long time, and then over here on the fast track of the cash flow game, I started doing IPOs, I started funding companies. I just kept practicing, but I stayed with it until I was successful. And that's the difference. The reason I stay back with real estate, I enjoy it, and bankers give me a lot of money for it, so it's nice and easy, and it's really easy to find a deal. I'd like to give credit for the person that gave me this. My rich dad always said focus, but follow one course until successful came from a group called Winners Camp in Hawaii, where they take young people and they train them to focus, not diversify. So basically that's why this advice here I think is very bad financial advice if you're an active investor, but it's very good advice if you're going to be a passive investor. And that completes this part of the section, and when we come back we'll go into how to have more control over your investments. Thank you very much. You know, I flunked out of school because I couldn't spell, and I tried this on the teacher. I said, it's a very uncreative person that cannot spell a word 3 or 4 different ways, you know. They still gave me an F, you know. And if you teach a person to fish, you feed them for what? Life. And that's from Sunday school. But because our school system is not teaching anybody to fish, what happens is the capitalists of the world come out and they're selling people fish. Those are financial planners, stockbrokers, real estate brokers, insurance, you know, and everybody's got to make a living. But if you look at the word sell fish, it spells selfish, you know what I mean? And that's my whole complaint, is because exactly as Scott was saying, is that people will come up and they'll only sell you what they make a commission on. And most of them are not investors, they're just commission salespeople or commission employees. And that's why we have so many people who are believing in saving money, getting out of debt, investing for long-term, and diversifying, because they're really sales pitches. And the last thing I want to say is this, is that, you know, there's a lot of people who believe in giving people fish, and these are the socialists of life. There's nothing wrong with being a socialist. I can't spell that either. But my rich dad said it was the Robin Hood theory of finance. You know, take from the rich and give to the what? Poor. As my rich dad said, the problem with giving poor people money is it just manufactures more poor people. You know, from the president on down, they all expect somebody to give them money all the time. So he says the problem with being Robin Hood, take from the rich and give from the poor, is Robin Hood still a crook. You know, and a lot of people think he's a nice guy and all this, but he was still a thief, stealing for people. So what the Rich Dad Company does is we don't sell investments, but we do our best to teach people to fish. And then you can do it any way you want. So that's what this whole Teach to Be Rich program is about and all this. So with that, one of the questions I'm always asked is, how do I get started? You know, how do I stop being a passive investor, and how do I become an active investor? And since I don't sell stocks or anything, I do sell education. That's why I created this cash flow board game. And I'll quickly go over it really quickly. I designed this cash flow board game. Here is the rat race. And people in the rat race, this is what you go to school to. You know, go to school to get a job, and one of them is rat race. People go inside here and they buy stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, and they buy a big house. What the rich invest in is out here called the fast track. This was 1933. It was created by the fast track was actually created by a man named Joseph Kennedy, who was the father of President John Kennedy. And the fast track said you had to be a multi-millionaire to invest out here. So the best investments are found out here, and the worst investments are in here, stocks, bonds, savings, and all that. The key is to get out of the rat race onto the fast track is you had to understand a financial statement. And that's what the cash flow game teaches. So one of the keys of getting from the rat race to the fast track is, in many ways, this is the financial statement from the cash flow board game, and it is the only game in the world that teaches people the fundamentals of accounting: income, expense, assets, liability, and the statement of cash flow. And so that's what this game is designed to do, so that you would have the skill to be able to be an investor on the fast track. And we'll go into why this document here is so important at the end of the program here. But that's why we created this board game. It's not an easy game. I recommend, you take about 4 hours to play it once. Then you play it about 4 different times. And then if you really want to get good, is you start teaching people, like, 10 other people. The more you teach, the more you learn. And that's why the game was created. So it's basically, this is what my rich dad taught me years ago, so that you can teach yourself and teach others. And in my opinion, this is one of the ways we can minimize that huge transfer of wealth with so many poor people inside a great country that's going broke. So when people ask me, how do I get started, this is how I recommend you get started. And here we have 4 people who've played my cash flow game and all this, but this is what it looks like. It looks like a Monopoly game. And there's a ritual I recommend to maximize your learning. So before you get started going in to start investing your hard-earned money, I recommend you start playing with paper money or fake money first, because it's a lot safer with, play money. So what I recommend before you start the game is, what you start by saying is, let's say you don't know the people, you introduce yourself and you say such things as, what my family taught me about, what I learned at home about money, stuff like this. Would you start that? What's your name?
My name is Anissa.
Anissa, would you start with that? That's a little ritual we have. See?
My name is Anissa, and what I learned about money at home is that money is very private, and it's not something that you want to discuss with anyone, even the professionals and other people that might help you grow it.
How many people have heard that at home? Good, thank you, very good. Next.
Hi, Robert. My name is Ron, and the thing I learned growing up is money does not grow on trees. Therefore, you should protect it.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Linda Taylor, and what I was taught was basically money doesn't grow on trees. Parents aren't made of money, so you can't afford certain things, so don't ask for it.
How many people were taught that you couldn't afford everything you wanted and stuff like that? Okay, thank you.
My name is John, and one of the things I learned from my grandparents who lived through the Depression was that you could count on pensions and you could count on Social Security.
How many people ever heard the same thing at your homes too? Good, thank you. That was my home, because my parents went through the Depression. So let's say you play the game. It takes about 4 hours. I recommend you don't drink, because or do other strange hallucinogenics and things like this, because this is not so much about fun. It is a fun game, but it's really to enhance your learning and your financial IQ here. So once the game is over, take about 4 hours, then I ask you to complete the game by saying something such as, what I learned from this game is tonight, or when I played it, or how this applies to my life is. So the game has to affect some part of your life now. So it is this ritual, and every time you play it, you go through that same ritual. You'll find out something new your parents told you, but at the end of the game, you'll find that it actually does affect your life. If it doesn't affect your life, it's just entertainment. If it does affect your life, it's education. So, and these people have already played the game, so would you mind sharing how the game has affected your life?
Sure. One of the things that I learned is start with the small deals first before you go into the big deals, because it will help you get over your fear of investing at all.
That's a very good lesson, because something I'll go into is a lot of times we have, especially men, that they think investing is something of a ego trip or something. So on the game board you have small deals and you have big deals, and the men naturally go for the big deals. And what I say, the reason games are great teaching tools is very simply because games reflect your behavior. Like how many people have played a game and somebody was a poor sport, they threw temper tantrums and all that, and stuff like that. That's a reflection of behavior. So with guys, I always see it. They always go for the big deal. They may be flat broke, but they want to play Tarzan or Rambo of investing, and they go for that. Okay? Yes?
The thing I learned is when you play this a few times, it actually messes with your emotions when you start looking for deals. You see them in the real world, and it starts just pulling at you. I think it helps you deal with the emotions of doing deals.
That's right. It's a very big point, because as Warren Buffett says, if you cannot control your emotions, you cannot control your money. And so one of the main reasons people are not financially well off is they let their emotions either get to them. You're like, oh, I just got to have that dress, you know, or I just got to have that new car. Or a lot of times for parents, the child will come up to you and say, oh, you know, I got to have this. And the parents emotionally, you know, give to their kids and all that. So as Buffett says, if you cannot control your emotions in this game, you cannot control it in the real world. So that's a very good life lesson there.
What I learned is the difference between earned income and a passive income, and working for income is not very much fun, but having your money work for you is.
Right. Earned income is you working for money, which is the highest taxed income, and passive income is your money working for you, which is the lowest taxed income. So just learning that makes the game tremendously valuable, because at that point, she starts to change the way she thinks, and she starts looking for passive income deals rather than working harder. As I said, one of the reasons of working harder is tough is because the more you work, the higher tax bracket you go into. If your money's working for you, you can pay zero taxes legally. And I do emphasize the word legally, you know, because you don't want to go to jail, because it's easier to make money outside of jail than inside of jail. What's you learned from playing this game?
The biggest thing that I learned is that you have to invest for cash flow, because without that, you'll never get out of the rat race. You'll never win the game.
That's a very good one. The difference between cash flow versus capital gains. Both are important. And if you're a very successful active investor, you'll invest for both of them. But most people are investing for one or the other. So that's how you start the game by saying what your family taught you, and you end the game with what you learned, and that's what makes the game valuable. Give a big hand for these people here. Thank you. So in moving on, I'd like to bring up my partner here. She's also my co-author, and that's Sharon Lechter. Would you please, big hand for Sharon, please? Now, I want to give credit where credit's due. Is when I turned Rich Dad, Poor Dad over to her, it was about 350 pages of swear words. And Sharon is the A student, and I am the F student. Okay, so that's why we work as a great partnership here. But she took Rich Dad, Poor Dad and cut it down to under 200 pages, and it made it an international bestseller. So I did write the book. Sharon did have to clean it up quite a bit, you know, because I am a former Marine. I don't speak with the kindness of language. But the reason I wanted Sharon to speak at this point here is because, as I said to some of you, I really did not like school. You know, I was a C, D, and F student, where Sharon was the A student. And during school, I always sat next to people like Sharon. And nothing's changed now that I'm an adult, you know what I mean? Because I always sat next to the A students so I could, you know, get past my tests. So would you mind talking about why you're happy with this product here, you know, Teach to be Rich? And,
absolutely.
Education important.
And Robert's right. You know, he was disenfranchised as a child, and I, guilty as charged, I was a straight A student. I was a neurotic straight A student. And I am now a recovering A student. So if any of you would like to join my club. But my passion came not from my experience at school, because I was one of the few that could excel in that environment. Don't know why. But I have 3 children with Michael, and all 3 of them struggled in that school system. So how many of you are parents? How many of you had parents? Thank you, like 100% participation. I saw my children lose their interest in learning. How many of you can agree with that? Okay. Our world has changed. We as parents have changed. Our school system has not changed. And I get very emotional about that, because that is my passion. And we've built this company to give an alternative, not only to you, but to you as parents, as grandparents, as aunts and uncles, to help change the future of our children. Because if they stay in school, they will not get financial education unless you provide it to them. We have a lot of initiatives that are starting, and there are some wonderful teachers out there, teachers that are seeking this information, but not enough. And as parents, we didn't do what we needed to with our children, and I want to make sure the information is there for you as parents to provide a valid future for your kids. And this is really, as we talked earlier, is a new era for Rich Dad. Because it's not just about you making money. It's about you not only learning how to bring financial freedom to yourself, but also how you can bring that financial freedom to others. And we talk about team sport. As a straight-A student, you did not want to make a mistake. How many of you can relate to that? The fear of failure. Even if I made it, I wouldn't admit it. How many of you are guilty of that? You know, I'll find an excuse and justify it any way I can because I want to be right. That was pounded into me. But I also learned in school that you had to go it alone. How many of you know that feeling? You have to do it by yourself. That's what we teach our children. However, I was the popular kid at test time. I had a lot of friends the few days before tests, and it's the group, it's that the advisors, being able to work together. And this information helps you, gives you the type of education that you've heard today from Robert, and you're going to continue hearing it, about why straight-A students aren't all rich. I love the section that says, don't teach pigs to sing.
What she's talking about here is this, is I would not have written a book on education if it wasn't fun. And I wanted to make it really fun, but also you have to be very careful on who you taught. So that's why I said don't teach pigs to sing, because how many people have ever tried to teach something to somebody when they didn't want to learn it? You know, it's really frustrating, it's demoralizing. That's why I have that. But make it also fun, you know?
Absolutely. And I just want to tell a quick story because we have so much more to share with you. But the game that you just saw these people play, I had the honor of coming to the first beta test when it was drawn on a piece of paper, and actually Robert will show it to you a little later, with my daughter who was 19 at the time. And we had 3 tables of people playing, and there were some pretty upset people in that room. They were saying everything that was wrong with the game. One of them was my husband. And there were bankers in the room, you know, very frustrated, couldn't get out of the rat race. And I'm sitting next to my daughter at a different table, and she's asking me questions, and I think, gosh, this is really good stuff. And I will admit, as a straight-A student, I was the only one that got out of the rat race. I'm kind of proud of that. But we had to leave early that day, because those of you who have teenage daughters, you know what it's like when you say, let's go play a financial board game. But we had another date, so we left, and I thought, this is fabulous. We walk out the door closes, and I'm waiting for my daughter to kind of give me a hard time, because I promised her 2 hours, and we were now 4 hours. She says, Mom, that game was awesome. That game, I learned more in the last 3 hours than I have in the last 3 years of high school. I had just met Robert and Kim that day. But I had been working with the school systems inside the system, which is frustrating, very frustrating, to get financial education into the school system for about 5 years. And it was the day that I met Robert and I saw that game that I knew Cash Flow, the board game, the Rich Dad information can change your life, but most importantly, it can change the future for our children.
So some of the other titles in education, I've been teaching since 1980 professionally. It's over 25 years. But you don't teach pigs to sing, why A students don't become rich. You know, Sharon didn't like that chapter that much. But anyway.
It was really tough.
The other one is why you cannot teach poor people to be rich. And that so many people want to save the poor, but you know, if they don't want to learn, you can't teach them anything. So that's unfortunate. And the last one is how to increase your financial intelligence. And the last one beyond that is finding your financial genius. So that's what this book is about. It's not traditional education, I want to promise you that. It's about making learning fun and exciting and beneficial to real life. So Sharon has her pet project is, when you look at the Cash Flow board game over here, one thing talks about charity, the need to give back. And the Rich Dad company practices what it preaches. You want to talk about Rich Kid, Smart Kid?
Absolutely. In everything we do, in everything that Robert teaches, Rich Dad message is, the more you give, the more you receive. So from the beginning of time when we started this company, all of our products discuss the importance of charity. And as a company, we have developed a website called richkidsmartkid.com. And it came from, if I can take a moment and tell the story, we came out with a Cash Flow for Children, Cash Flow for Kids board game about 5 years ago. We live here in Arizona. We went to the superintendent of education and said, we would like to donate Cash Flow for Kid board games for every elementary school in the state of Arizona.
These games, this is the board game, and this is the electronic version of it. You can play over the web.
And we were in the office of the superintendent of education for the state of Arizona, Robert and I, just like this, and she said to us, it's too much trouble. Both of us went, but you know, all things happen for a reason. It made me so mad. It made me so mad. I said, okay, how can we get around the institution of education? It's not the teachers, it's the institution.
Yeah, and as my father being a teacher, the reason they cannot teach this stuff is very simply because the government dictates what is taught to the kids. The teachers have no power over that. So that's when Sharon and I walked out, and I kind of smiled and said, see why I don't like school? You know, she goes, yeah. But a big reason then was, we're not blaming the teachers, it is the system. Does that make sense, you guys here? And the teachers have no power over what's to be taught. The government dictates that. Okay.
So we took that no and the anger that we had and said, how can we still accomplish what we want to accomplish? We created richkidsmartkid.com, which is a website with financial education, totally with curriculum from kindergarten through 12th grade. It is available to schools around the world and to you as parents around the world. And it is for free. There is no charge. Through that website, if you are a school, you can also get a downloadable version of the Cash Flow for Kids board game for free. Again, anywhere in the world. So 15 months after we got a no, through another direction, the electronic website, Rich Kid Smart Kid, was available to every student in Arizona around the system through their desktops. So we turned it, and then we're able to leverage that and offer it to the world. And I'm very happy to say we've had over 2 million students play Rich Kid Smart Kid.
Yeah. So that's the piece on education. Like I said, I would not have written the book Teach to Be Rich if it was going to be boring like school. Let's make it fun and exciting and all this. So when we come back, we'll go into how to be an active investor and take control of your investments. So thank you very much, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Investor, educator, and author Robert Kiyosaki has changed millions of lives all over the world. His book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, has been on the New York Times bestseller list for over 5 years. We all know that the gap between the haves and the have-nots is growing, and Social Security and Medicare are in a financial mess. And just affording to live is getting expensive. So how does a person get ahead financially? The answer is raising your financial IQ and having your money work for you. Here's Robert Kiyosaki with Rich Dad's Teach to Be Rich.
Welcome back, and as you notice, we have a couple more props up on stage here. But going into it quickly is in 1974, as I said, the world changed. In 1974, employees had to become investors through the 401k and mutual funds and all that. And unfortunately, our school systems don't teach us much about finances or how to invest. And because they don't teach us much about it, most people think investing is risky. And what they fail to understand that investing isn't risky, being uneducated is risky. Well, my rich dad said, there's no such thing as a bad investment, there's only bad investors. Well, there's no such thing as a risky investment, there's only risky investors. And the reason I say that, as a professional investor, you can ask Kenny, we're always looking for bad investments. We're not looking for good ones. You know, because a bad investment's where you make your money. Because that's what we do, it reduces your risk. So really what risk is this. Is no control. And so if you look at the qualifications I ran up earlier in the program between a passive investor and an active investor, passive investors have no control. That's why they think investing is risky. And the riskiest of all investments are, again, savings, stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, because you have no control over them. So to understand this better, we're going to use the example of learning how to drive a car. How many people realize that there is some risk in driving a car? But how many people still drive a car every day? Right. So the reason driving a car, while there's risk, doesn't have to be risky, is when you walk up to a car, the first thing you look at, does it have a steering wheel? Does it have a gas pedal? Does it have a brake? Does it have a gear shift? How many people would not drive the car if it had no steering wheel? How many people would say, driving a car without a steering wheel doesn't make any sense to me? Okay? So that's one of the reasons people think investing is risky, is they don't have these controls. So the way you look at it is, here I come up to the car, I look it over, I climb in, if we can get into this thing. Ugh. So I'm driving down the road, you know, in control. I have a gas pedal, you know, boom, 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 and a brake. And the brake, you know, I go forward, stop. How many people have ever driven a car without brakes? How many people found it an exciting experience? I have. Like this. And you have a gear shift over here because it's, you know, go forward or you go back. And all of these things give you control. So those are the 4 basic controls, and there's 2 more controls you've got to have. One of them is you've got to have a driver's license, which proves you took driver's ed, you passed the test. And the last control is proof of insurance. So if, let's say, you're driving down the road, having a good time and all this, and all of a sudden you hear, bing, ding, 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 ding. The policeman comes up to the car, and being a good policeman, what's the first thing they ask you for? Driver's license and proof of insurance. So those are the 6 basic controls you got to have. Now, what happens to most people, because they don't have education, or, you know, in their investments, they're driving down the road, you know, in mutual funds, and there's no brakes, there's no... Because people in savings, stocks, bonds, mutual funds have absolutely no control. And that's why they think investing is risky. So you're driving down the road like this, going, whoa, whoa. And the worst thing about it is this, is your financial advisor. Do they have any control? No. You see, your financial advisor or the big company they work for, let's say it's XYZ Investment Banking Company, they have no control either. So they're telling you to diversify, to invest for the long term and all this, because they're driving down the road like this. And what it really looks like is this. Your financial advisor is this. Oh, I tell you what, I can't see the marketplace, but I tell you, stocks should go up, you know, and the third quarter should be a little bit better. And this is what most financial advisors are telling you. Why? Because they have no control. And the reason they tell you to diversify is to protect them, because they have no control, and neither do you. Does that make sense, you guys here? And so as a professional investor, as a active investor, the number one thing is control. Got it? So let me see if I can get out of this wreck now. Jesus. Oh, my goodness. Oh. Yeah. I broke the car. Oh. When you go into, when you have no control, what a professional investor is looking for, there's 6 things. 6 things in driving a car, 6 things as an investor. First is income. I want to control income. Second is expenses. 3, asset value. 4, liability. 5, financial education or the management. Do you realize, and 6 is insurance. Do you realize Most people cannot call the mutual fund manager and say, I don't like what you're doing. Do you realize most people cannot call Bill Gates, the CEO of Microsoft, and say, I don't like the way you're managing their expenses of a company. What's this new jet? Why'd you hire that worthless CEO? Why don't you hire somebody else? And the reason, so what a professional investor is looking for is control of these things. Number 1, income. 2, expenses. 3, asset value. 4, liability or debt. And you surround this whole thing is you want good financial education, or you want management, and you want insurance here. Those are the 6 basic controls as an investor. Let me give you an example. Let's say I buy a 2-bedroom, 2-bath house, and I want to increase its income. One thing I can do is I might be able to borrow a little bit of money, add a 3rd bedroom and a 2nd bath or a 3rd bath onto it, and what that does is increase my cash flow. That's an example of improving or taking control of this thing. If I call Bill Gates, like I said, and I say, Bill, I don't like that new jet you bought, what's he going to say to me? So what? Or I call my financial mutual fund guy, the man, like a Peter Lynch or something like this. They're not going to take my phone call. They don't have to tell me any controls here. So these are the 6 controls an investor must have. And that's what makes the very, very low risk. One last point I'll bring up, and then I'll bring Kenny and Garrett up here about insurance and all this, is that let's say this is 10 acres of land. What the value of a property is when I look at this here depends upon who I am professionally. Let's say I'm a farmer. That's my profession. I look at that 10 acres of land, and what I'll say is that thing is only worth $10,000 an acre to me. But if I look at it the way Kenny looks at it as a real estate developer, that same 10 acres may be worth $1 million to me. And that's what I mean by control, is that by looking at it from different points of view, that's how I make my money. So that's the same way when I saw those 10 acres in Bisbee, Arizona, they wanted $100,000 for it. And I said, what's the thing worth? It's not worth much as land, but it's worth $1.5 million as a manufactured housing type of thing. So this is how I have control. And that's, as an active investor, is what I'm going for. If I don't have controls of these things, I don't invest. So with that, Kenny, you want to come up here and then talk about, as a professional investor, what you look for and what controls you want. Let's a big hand for Kenny here. Thank you.
Well, I think Robert touched on it a little bit. The first thing that we look for are problems, to be quite honest. We look for people who are poor managers or people who aren't seeing opportunities that we might see just through our day-to-day financial education. And I'll just give you a couple examples of that. Robert and Kim and I bought a building in the Biltmore area here in Phoenix just 1 year ago. And it was a small property with 68 units. And it's not far from Highland in the 24th area, in the Esplanade area there.
It's close to where Donald Trump is building his new building. Okay. So
right, and it had all the things that we wanted. It had really poor management, really bad income, and really high expenses. But it was very well located. It was a very nice property. What had happened was the owner was absentee. In other words, he was treating the property like an investment instead of a business, because really real estate is a business. If you don't have the proper team around it, it will go down in value. So this investor lived in Mexico and hadn't been to the property in a long time and had been through many different management companies, and the property had had a very poor history of occupancy. So what we were looking for was the opportunity piece. In other words, it had really low income and really high expenses. And the reason it had low income was because the management had not followed the systems. They had put poor tenants in, people that weren't paying rent, etc. And the reason it had high expenses was because of the low occupancy, they were having to spend money on the advertising and things like that that happen when your occupancy's low. So what we did is we just put a better plan on it. That's all. So when we bought the property, Robert and I, we both immediately knew we wanted it because the property had been running at 68% occupancy. And the expenses were high. So what we did is we put the property into escrow, and we had the whole plan on the property before we were going to buy it. So I knew exactly what our plan was to turn the property into a profitable real estate venture before we closed it. And I knew everything about it through the process of which is called due diligence, which to me is one of the most important things that you can do before you buy any piece of property.
And this is Kenny's product that he did with me, and I think if you're going to be a professional investor, I think this is essential for your library. It's called How to Increase Your Investment from Your Real Estate Investments. And inside of it, I think this is what makes it priceless. It's what Kenny calls his due diligence checklist. Because Kenny and Kim and I are not flippers. We're not trying to buy something to flip it. These are all the checklists. When you inspect a property, you go through it. Say, this is what it needs, this is what it needs, does it have it, doesn't have it. And where most people become afraid, this is worth tens of thousands, maybe millions of dollars, because it is really the inspection of the building that either makes it profitable or not profitable. And this is really what you need in the whole thing. So Kenny's been very generous to giving all the actual forms he uses, checklists he goes through. Because most people are trying to buy, exactly as Buffett says, they're trying to buy because the prices are going up. That's gambling. That's capital gains. What we're looking for is solid value, the way Buffett looks at it. And it can only be done through a due diligence checklist. And it's not here right now, but there's also 4 audio cassettes that you can listen to and actually walk you through how this is used here. So this is essential for anybody who wants to invest in real estate, how to analyze a property. The interesting thing that Kenny says, when most people look at these, go through the diligence checklist, and they see horrible problems, they back off. But the reason we make so much money is because there are problems, right?
Well, we buy properties with 20, 30, 40% vacancy. That's where I look to buy. If I don't want to buy a property that is really highly occupied and has their rents at market, because to me there's very small opportunity for value growth, which is what we look for.
Right. So this is a very important product, and if you're interested, buy it. If you're not interested, don't buy it. But this is what really makes you rich. That's why it's such an important product. And the thing about this is, the gentleman asked me during the break, how do you find great investments in this hot market? Well, this is the hottest market of all. Like I said, you can walk to Trump's new building from the building we bought. It was sitting there. Nobody wanted it because of low income, high expenses, and all this. And the first thing that Kenny did was renegotiate the mortgage, got the lower interest rate on it. And all these things, that's where you make your money. You're not buying it to flip a property. That's gambling.
As a matter of fact, we received an offer, unsolicited. We didn't list the property. We bought the property for $4.6 million. We received an offer 1 year later for $7 million. And we turned it down because we're not in the business of flipping property. We're in the business of long-term hold and cash flow. So we still own the property today.
Right. And like I said, Trump is building right down the street, and this is the hottest market of all. So this is how you find great investments, is you have to do your due diligence on a project. Right?
Well, the due diligence basically builds the plan for the whole property and building your wealth.
Big hand for Kenny. Thank you very much. All right, Garrett's coming up here. What Kenny is talking about here is management, which takes a little financial education. So Garrett's going to come up and talk a little bit about insurance, and insurance via the corporate asset protection.
Well, let me take a little informal poll right here. How many people have been sued? Let's be honest. How many people in the room have been sued? All right. How many people haven't been sued yet? All right. How many people think we live in a litigious society? And how many people would say there are a few attorneys out there without enough to do? Right? It's true. We live in a highly litigious society, and you need to take steps to protect your assets. And there are 2 forms for accomplishing that. One is insurance. When you buy an asset, like Robert says, he doesn't buy an asset unless he's got insurance on it. When you buy a piece of real estate, you're going to insure it. But what's the problem with insurance these days? Do insurance companies find reasons not to cover you? Yes. Do they get up and leave the state like they do every 5 years in California? Yes. So you need to take other steps to protect your real estate and your other assets. You need another form of insurance, which are entities. And that's what I wrote about in Own Your Own Corporation. is how to use these entities, the good entities, S corporations, C corporations, limited liability companies, and limited partnerships to protect your assets.
What Garrett's saying, if you're going to be rich, there's no sense not insuring it. Does that make sense, you guys here? Well, a lot of people want to get rich, but they want to save a few bucks and not hire a person like Garrett to protect their assets from lawsuits. And I've seen that happen a lot of times. And the one thing they say about insurance, you cannot buy insurance when you need it. You know, like this car wreck over here. After I crash my car, I can't call my insurance agent and say, would you insure my car? You must buy insurance prior to the wreck. That's the rule of thumb here, okay?
Yeah, you can't form a corporation or an LLC to protect your real estate once you've been sued. It's too late at that point. So you need to take steps right at the start. When you're looking for that first piece of property, you need to take steps to protect it using the right entity.
So can I say something about that? As my poor dad always said, he was really proud of it. And this is a poor man's thinking. My house is in my name. My car is in my name. How many people have things in your name? Okay, that's poor person's thinking. You want nothing in your name if you're planning on being rich. If you're planning on being poor, keep it in your name because nobody's going to bother you.
Well, and the attorneys can take it from you.
Right.
So, sure, leave it exposed. But if you plan to be rich, if you plan to pass these assets on to your kids or your charities, you need to set up the right entities at the start.
That's their own corporations. So what are the worst, because what are the worst corporations or worst entities?
Well, the worst entity, I call it the good, the bad, and the ugly. The bad entity is a sole proprietorship. Offers no asset protection at all. If you operate a business as a sole proprietor.
And do a lot of accountants recommend people be sole proprietors?
Yeah, they do. I don't know why. Well, they don't understand the nature of our legal system, whereby if you operate as a sole proprietor, you're completely exposed.
And the reason accountants do that is because a lot of them aren't rich, and they're not planning on being rich either. They're basically workers.
Well, a lot of accountants, with all due respect to Sharon Lechter, a lot of accountants will ask, how much money are you making in your business? And if you're only making $10,000 or $20,000, they'll say you don't need to incorporate. But that's the wrong question to ask. They need to ask, how much do you have to protect? You have a house, you have a bank account, you have other assets. You want to protect those assets from business claims that can come your way. If you operate as a sole proprietorship, all those assets are exposed.
Okay. So the worst is a sole proprietorship. What's the second worst?
Well, the worst is a general partnership, because that's liability times two. Not only in a general partnership are you responsible for your own mistakes, but you're responsible for your partner's mistakes. You may not have agreed to a contract. You may have been 1,000 miles away when that contract was signed. And yet, as a general partner, you are equally responsible for everything that happens in that general partnership business.
Good. So how much does it cost me to employ you to write me well, first of all, why do you recommend Nevada and Wyoming?
Well, Nevada and Wyoming have very favorable asset protection laws. The LLC laws in both states provide great asset protection for individuals. And it's explained in the book, but basically it's the charging order procedure that gives you a great deal of protection. As well, in Nevada and Wyoming, there's no state tax. They offer a great deal of privacy, and there's no information sharing with the IRS, which can be of benefit to some people.
Right. There's no information sharing. You want to look me up, they won't tell you who owns the corporation.
Right.
Which is good. And then most people recommend Delaware. Why don't you recommend Delaware?
Well, Delaware has some extra fees. You have to do some additional reporting, whereas Nevada and Wyoming, it's much more streamlined. There's less requirements with one of those types of corporations, Nevada and Delaware. Delaware is great for the Fortune 500 company that wants a body of corporate law, a well-established court system. But for the majority of people who are protecting their assets, they're going to use Nevada or Wyoming.
And so how much does it cost to hire a great attorney like you to set up let's say an LLC for me?
Well, Robert, that's one of the things that's interesting. This is not expensive. It is only $695 plus the state filing fees to set up a corporation anywhere in the U.S. So it's not expensive. If you go to an attorney and they say it's going to be $2,000 to $5,000 to set up an entity, shop elsewhere, because it's not expensive. You can do this and consider it like insurance. It's just a payment you'll make, a low annual payment to make to protect your assets.
And the other question is this, is that You have to, update it every year, or you have to have a meeting every year. How much does that cost to do that?
Well, we charge a flat fee of $150 to prepare the minutes. You can do it yourself. The problem is a lot of people don't. So for $150 a year, your corporate books are kept in shape, and you're not going to have a problem with someone trying to pierce the corporate veil and go after your personal assets.
So after this, let's say $700, it costs you $150 after that. That's really, really good insurance, because as Garrett says, you can't buy insurance after you're sued. And they can come and take everything you want after that. So my wife and I have multiple S and LLCs and Cs.
You've done a good job.
Yeah, they can hit one, they can't take it all, which is what we want. And without mentioning names, is the last thing, is there's somebody peddling something that you think is really wacko?
Well, there's a fellow out there that's peddling limited partnerships as the be-all, end-all, and he gives 100% guarantee of asset protection. And in all good conscience, you cannot make 100% guarantee on this. Yes, you can protect yourself. Yes, you can be better off using a corporation or an LLC than by going it alone. But no one can give 100% asset protection guarantee.
So, anyway, let's have a big hand for Garrett. I think
Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, this thing, I know it may sound like a lot to you, taking control. A lot of people say, well, I don't want to fix toilets. I don't want to do this. So you don't ever take control. On our investments, Kim and I do not fix toilets, because these hands were not made for work, you know what I mean? So anyway, with that. So I want to bring up Kim, and she wants to speak to the women and how to start. And this is, all part of how you get started. And this is my sweetheart, Kim. Let's have a big hand for her, please. And I know she didn't marry me for my money, because over 20 years ago when we met, I was flat broke because I lost another company and all this. And she was one of the few women with the beauty and the brains, but she had backbone to, to put up with all we went through to build our fortunes again. So I thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Robert and I just celebrated our 19th wedding anniversary. We've been together 22 years. And
I did good, huh? I did good.
We both did good. We both did good. But I've got to say, it definitely has not been boring. And actually, Robert talked about how much debt he was in. I didn't understand good debt or bad debt at that time, but we actually celebrated when we hit zero. We popped the champagne on that one. But Robert's talking a lot about control, and my concern is that there's so many women out there today that feel out of control when it comes to money and when it comes to their financial futures. And I am a huge proponent of women getting involved in the world of investing. And more importantly, my passion is really to encourage and educate women to take control of their financial lives and ultimately to become financially independent. Because there's a lot of women I see every day who are depending on somebody else, be it a man, be it a family, a company, or a government, to take care of them financially. And times have changed.
Why don't you tell them the story of your mom and all that, and why you were so adamant about it?
Yeah, well, what drives me, what Robert's talking about, is there was an incident that happened when I was very young. And I was 14 years old, and I came home from school one day, and I walked in, and my mom and her best friend were in the dining room. And I kind of heard them talking, and I walked over there, and I could see that my mom's friend was really upset, and she was crying, and my mom kind of, signaled me to, just leave us alone. And so I went away, but I didn't go too far, and was listening to this conversation. And the gist of the conversation is my mom's best friend's, her husband was leaving her for a younger woman. And she was distraught, she was crying, she was upset. She's like, I can't believe this is happening. And I kept listening, and then I heard her say something that just really struck me. And my mom had asked, did you realize what was happening? And she said, my marriage has not been good for many, many years, but I stayed because at least I was taken care of financially. She said, I was too concerned that if I left, I didn't know how to take care of myself. And I was 14 years old, and I heard that, and I went, wow. I'm like, here's this woman, she's in a terrible marriage, she's miserable, yet the only reason she stays is because financially she doesn't know how to take care of herself. So at 14, I made the decision I was never going to be dependent on somebody else for my financial future. And that's why I speak out to women, because I think women today It's no longer a luxury or just a good idea. I think it's really a necessity that we start to take control of our financial lives. Would you agree?
Right.
Thank you.
So if I could say, because we had Kim follow Garrett, is Kim has her own corporations. We don't have a prenuptial agreement and all that, because if I horse around and it's gone, she doesn't have to worry. There's no fighting. She owns her own corporations, her own assets, her own bank account. She's gone. It's split already. And the reason we do that is just to cut this dependency stuff out. Right? We just That's true.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So she's, in many ways, Garrett knows she's a lot smarter than I am today on this stuff anyway, because she wants to make sure that she's independent. So she has her own corporations. I have my own corporations, my own investments, and things like that.
Well, you wouldn't want me dependent on you.
No, I don't.
That wouldn't work either. What's happened is as we become more and more independent, our relationship changes, because for me personally, my self-respect goes up, my confidence goes up, and all of a sudden we don't need each other anymore. It's like we want to be together, but that dependency isn't there anymore, and that's made a huge difference. So times have changed, and what's worked for our mothers and our grandmothers may not work for us and our daughters and our granddaughters. And there's some startling statistics I want to share with you. This is in the U.S., but I see the same pattern happening throughout the world, which is, one of the statistics is 47% of women over the age of 50 are single, meaning they are dependent for their financial well-being. And many of us have heard the statistic, 1 out of 2 marriages ends in divorce. So if she was counting on Prince Charming, think again, and who usually ends up with the children? The woman. So she's now responsible for herself and her kids. The first year on average after a divorce, a woman's standard of living drops 74%. His does not. And if you're concerned about your mothers or your grandmothers, of the elderly, there's statistics all over the place, but of the elderly living in poverty, 3 out of 4 are women. And the most interesting thing is 80% of those women were not poor when their husbands were alive. So what the statistics tell me is that as women, especially as we become older, we have not been educated, we have not been prepared to take care of ourselves financially, and now more than ever it's more important to do so. And it's not rocket science, as Robert's sharing with you and the advisors will share with you. It's not rocket science. It takes some time. It takes some education. We always say start small, expect to make mistakes, and take little steps, take baby steps to get there. And I'm actually a very good example of somebody that knew absolutely nothing when it came to money and investing. And it was in 1989, Robert came to me and he said, "Kim, it's time you start investing." And I didn't even know what the word meant. You know, I've seen the Wall Street Journal, that's about it. So he started to teach me what his rich dad taught him. And then I was kind of sent out on the street to go figure it out. And to make a long story short, my very first investment was a little 2-bedroom, 1-bath house in Portland, Oregon. It was $45,000. I was going to have to put $5,000 down, and it was going to give me a cash flow of $50 a month. And I was so proud of it. But I'll tell you, when Kenny talks about due diligence, I was so scared. I was terrified. What if I make a mistake? What if the tenant moves out? What if? I did due diligence 10 times more than I needed to do. I was so scared. I didn't trust myself. I didn't know what I was doing. But finally the day came to close on the property. And we're in the office of the real estate agent. And 2 things happened. One, they needed my signature, and it was really hard to get because my hand was shaking so bad. And the other problem was they couldn't pry that $5,000 check out of my hand. But I did that deal, and I went on to do more and more, and with every deal I did, I learned something new. And there's nothing more valuable than the actual experience that you get, and nobody can tell you about it until you actually get out there and do it. So today I control millions and millions of dollars worth of real estate, I keep learning every day. I keep getting more and more educated. And it all started with that little 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. It started with a little education, and it started with that first step. And just a little inside story. When
Go ahead and tell.
I can tell it? Okay. When Robert talked about that deal that I did where we borrowed the $8 million, he wasn't real involved in it at the time. And this time, instead of walking into a real estate agent's office, we walked into the attorney's boardroom. There were like 15 banker's boxes full of documents and paperwork. And we had everything was lined up to sign, and he looks at me and he goes, "What did you borrow? How much did you borrow? What are you doing? What is this?"
And when she said $8 million, I said, You borrowing $8 million? And so we came deciding she was calm as a cucumber, and then they passed the thing to me. I was like, $8 million? What has my wife bought here? So the rules have changed anyway.
The rules have changed. And I want to say, if I can do it, I mean, I started from nothing. If I can do it, you can do it. It's not rocket science.
It's just more zeros. That's about the only difference.
Well, it's, as Kenny said, it's the same, whether it's Hong Kong or Phoenix or wherever, it's the same formula, just more zeros.
So if we can encourage you, the reason we showed this wreckage of this car here, most people think investing is risky. What is really risky is not being in control and taking bad financial advice. Does that make sense to you guys here? So thank you very much. And
just one last thing I'd like to say to women, one final statistic, because I think it's very important.
They always get the last word, you know what I'm saying?
Which is that the statistics studies come out and said that only 20% of baby boomer women will be financially secure in retirement. That means 80% of us will not be. So I really want to thank you for being here, and thank you for listening and watching this program, because again, it's just education, and by taking those steps, you're saying, I'm going to be part of that 20% and not part of that 80%. Thank you.
Thank you. No problem. Okay, when we come back, we'll go into how to listen to good advisors, because as I said, I didn't do well in school, but I always surround myself with very smart A-student advisors. And I'll have my advisors, they'll be talking about what they do and how you find good advisors for yourself. So we'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you very much.
Investor, educator, and author Robert Kiyosaki has changed millions of lives all over the world. His book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, has been on the New York Times bestseller list for over 5 years. We all know that the gap between the haves and the have-nots is growing, and Social Security and Medicare are in a financial mess. And just affording to live is getting expensive. So how does a person get ahead financially? The answer is raising your financial IQ and having your money work for you. Here's Robert Kiyosaki with Rich Dad's Teach to Be Rich.
What I'd like to go into really quickly for a while is the ES, the B, and the I. And as you may notice, that one of the ways I am successful is because I did very poorly in school. And because I did poorly in school was I learned to cooperate and hang around, like I said, smart people. So one of the reasons I am successful is I'm smart enough to not hang around with what I call losers. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but my time is very important to me. How many people in this room hang out with people that actually bring you down? Good. You know, that you may love them, and nothing saying is right or wrong with that, but I need to get on with my life and my work. So that's why I've been very careful who I spend my time with. So before we bring Sharon up here, and we're going to talk about this quadrant really quickly. Are you ready? Let's have a hand for Sharon, please. Now, Sharon is a CPA, knowing anything with a CPA. Would you mind telling them the difference between E's, S's, B's, and I tax-wise, the 43 Tax Act and the 86 Tax Reform Act?
Absolutely. How many of you would like to pay fewer taxes? Okay, then you have to move to the right side of the quadrant. In 1943, employees lost half their paycheck before they saw it. It was the Withholding Act. So all of you who have been employees or are employees know that little word called net pay. You think you're making one thing, but you're actually making your net pay because the government takes its share before you get yours. So you're not really able to spend what you earn. You earn it, you get taxed, and then hopefully you can live on what you get what's left.
The 43 Act was called the Current Tax Payment Act, and basically it meant the government gets paid first. But as a CPA, can you do anything for an E?
There's absolutely no tax planning that an employee can do that will help you get to the right side of the quadrant.
And the reason I want Sharon to start first is because taxes are our single largest expense. Like I say, in 2005, I will spend more, pay more out in taxes than most people will earn in their lifetime. So I'm not against paying taxes. I just want to pay as little as possible. Right?
Right. And then there was the Tax Reform Act of 1986. And it was something that eliminated what few tax benefits were still left for highly paid professionals, doctors, lawyers, architects, accountants. It took it away.
The A students, justifiably so, got theirs taken away, And the C students are intact here.
However, this is now my line, the A students, the E's and the S's, if they are smart, will start working on the right side of the quadrant, starting a part-time business, buying that piece of real estate, because that's how you build wealth. On the left side of this quadrant is you working for money. So the only option is another job or more clients. And the more successful you become, the less time you have. On the right side, the people on the right side, the business owners, the investors, they wrote the tax laws. So the tax laws were written for the rich, and therefore they benefit the rich. So what you want to do is to start acting like a rich person and doing what the rich do. And that's what this program is all about.
So can I add one more thing? And please listen to this, because this is one of the hardest things for people to understand. When I say work for free, these people go psychotic. Because they have, I must do something to get paid. They will not work for free. Over here, people work for free because they're not working for the same kind of income. It is one of the toughest things to understand. I'd rather work, most of my friends will work for free simply because they'd rather have a different kind of income here. These people are entrepreneurs, and these people here are worker bees. And they have a different mindset when it comes to that paycheck. And if you can let go of the idea of needing that paycheck, which I don't expect too many people to understand yet, because so many people are so needy for that money that they cannot move here. It's really this horrible feeling inside. So if you can work for free over here, you'll actually get richer and pay less taxes. It's really an irony of the whole thing.
And earlier, Robert said, the left side, these people are working for income, the paycheck. Okay, on the right, people are working to build assets that generate income, right, where their money is working for them. And that's the biggest difference, and that's the way to wealth. And you can be operating in two different quadrants, but you must start operating on the right side of the quadrant.
This is where the tax breaks are. I can pay zero taxes. And like I said earlier, the problem with the 401k, when you put a 401k as a passive investor, you're still taxed like an employee. I mean, why would you want to do that? It makes no sense to me. But they don't tell you that in school. They say 401k is a good idea. As a rich person, 401k actually makes no sense. It's too risky. My banker won't lend me money. I can't get insurance on it. And in fact, the government taxes me on it. It's ridiculous. It is one of the most ridiculous plans I've ever seen, personally. If you're going to be rich. If you want to be poor, 401k is great. Knock yourself out. Have a good time, you know.
When you pull out that income, you pay the highest tax rate. It makes no sense.
It makes no sense. Okay? So, thank you, Sharon. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Give her a hand. I want to bring Michael Lecter up, her husband, and Michael Lecter, may or may not know this, he is one of the most influential and successful and most famous patent attorneys or intellectual property attorneys in America.
Well, thank you, sir.
And I'd like to show you why I hired Michael years and years ago. Was this here, back in the 70s, was my first multi-million-dollar project. What it is a little shoe pocket. I designed it in the 70s. They went on the running shoes like this, and you put inside here a key, some money, and it also came with an ID card in case you drop dead. They could identify the body. Because jogging had just started, and I designed this product like this, and it went on the shoe, and this was the first prototype of it. This is a prototype. We sat there with a little sewing machine, we chopped it up and all this, and then an ID card in case you, this is a production model here. But the reason I went to see Michael first this time when I designed the cash flow game is very simply because back then when I designed this game, this product in the 70s, I didn't have the $7,000 to hire a patent attorney. So I figured since I was good at marketing, I could outgun the market. And so I came out to market with this product. I made Playboy magazine, Gentleman's Quarterly, Runner's World magazine. My two partners and I were in our 20s. We became multi-millionaires, went straight to the top. There was only one problem, is we didn't protect it. And soon after we came out with this, my nylon and Velcro surfer wallets took off also. The whole business exploded on us. And because we were successful, the crooks came in or the copycats came in. Well, it's not their fault, it's my fault because I didn't see Michael at first. Does that make sense, you guys here? For $7,000, I could still be a millionaire. But we went straight up and we went straight down trying to save $1 million. So this time, when I designed the cash flow board game, I walked into Michael's office with this, and he's the first person I see. And this here is the early prototype of this game here, what you see here. And this is what I walked in to see Michael about, and his reputation went way ahead of him, and I decided to hire the very best I could find. And that's Michael Lecter.
Thank you. Well, we've got to put this into perspective.
Okay.
Now, Robert walks into my office, and I've got I'm semi-retired at this point, but I had the big corner office with the big desk and the walnut on the wall, and in comes Robert, and he was wearing a Hawaiian shirt, shorts, and he says something like,
retired.
And we hit it off right away. And he says something really lofty, like, I'm on a mission. I'm going to raise the financial well-being of mankind. And I'm looking at this guy, and he cleans up pretty well. But I mean, you should have seen him. And I'm going, okay, well, I hear you. So what do we got? And he pulls out this roll of paper. And he spreads it out on my desk. And it was the prototype for the cash flow game. And you know what? Mission accomplished. He has actually raised financial well-being of mankind.
Because this game's now in how many different languages?
Oh, Lord. I've lost track. 30 or 40 languages, is that right?
15 games, 44 books.
15 games. The books are in 44 different languages. Anyway. Now,
and just to let you know how far it went is my books, the Chinese Communist government recommends 20 U.S. books. We have 2 out of the 20 they recommend. So that's how much it's
and the books are referred to as the Purple Storm. You see a book in black and purple, what's the first thing you think? Rich Dad. And that didn't happen by accident.
That was all by design. You know.
That's called a trademark, and you're building your reputation. Again, you're building intellectual property assets.
This is the point is that, Michael, your book here is this, is protecting a number one asset. And when people says it takes money to make money, that's not really quite true because your greatest asset are your ideas. And so I took the word Rich Dad and we made it a brand, a trademark. How much would you say Rich Dad's worth today?
Oh, wow. In the hundreds of millions of dollars?
That's how much the name is worth because Michael protected it all over the world.
And what did it mean 10 years ago?
Nothing.
You had a wealthy father.
Yeah. So when somebody says it takes money to make money, they really don't know what they're talking about. But you have to operate like a B, not an E or an S here.
You build an asset, and then you leverage that asset. If your contribution to a business is a piece of intellectual property, some intangible asset that may have cost you very little cash out of hand, your return on investment can be infinite.
It's like the name Coca-Cola. The plant and equipment is worth about $8 billion. The word Coca-Cola is worth about $80 billion. How much do you think Google is worth as a name today? It's in
Harley
billions.
Davidson.
Harley Davidson. They're worth billions. Apple, billions. So those are some of the differences between rich people and poor people. As Sharon said, these guys are working hard, and these guys are thinking hard. There's a difference.
So you build the asset, you protect it. You establish an exclusive right to it, and then you can leverage it into a business.
Or you can do what I did and, you know, make somebody else very rich. And we're very smart, but we lost it all to save $7,000.
You got to remember, the marketplace is not like a sprint. It's not a race. You can't run faster than the competition. I mean, it's more like a relay race, except the competition can come and grab the baton out of your hand.
So, thank you. The next person I want to bring up, you can stay up here, is Blair Singer, because Blair does a lot of work with these two products. Like I said, the first thing my rich dad said to me when I was going to become a B in 1974 was I had to learn how to sell, and secondly is how to build a team, right? These are Blair's two books.
Absolutely. And how many people in this room have ever had at least what you would consider to be at least one, like Michael says, at least one good idea? How many people have ever had more than one? But how many people have ever met somebody that had a good idea, didn't make any money with it? How many know somebody like that intimately well? And see, and one of the things, and when we did the advisor series, one of the first advisor books was Sales Dogs, because the number one skill in business is you got to be able to sell. How many people here have ever tried to get your point of view across to somebody else and they totally didn't get it? How many people realize it was their problem? You see, and so one of the things that keeps people from moving from the left to the right side as a business owner is three primary skills. Number one, you got to be able to sell. All the great ideas, all the great products in the world do no good unless you can communicate it to somebody else and get them to take action on that. How many people would like to be able to know how to do that? How many would like to just be able to do it at home? You see, and so it's more, the reason I say that is it's not just, formally as a business skill, it's a life skill. The thing that I work with businesses all over the world over the last, we've known each other for what, 20 years? Work with businesses all over the place. And what pains me is entrepreneurs, people really want to go out and make something happen, but they can't get anybody to come to them with any kind of cash to exchange for the idea or the service.
They can't sell.
They can't sell it. They can't sell it. And so that's number one. Number two is, along with sales, in order to be, the difference over here, these guys work mostly on their own. I know this intimately well, okay? But the idea is if you're going to build a business, you got to build a championship team. And the reason sales is number one, because it's not just about selling product to somebody else, it's also about selling why somebody would want to be on your team. Because if you can't communicate that, why would anybody want to play on your team? So that's what we do, is we work, the reason for those two books, the ABCs, you got them over there?
Right here.
Yeah. Sales Dogs, which basically says that you don't have to be an attack dog to be successful in sales. Everybody can sell. It's not rocket science, although when I ask, how many people here, by show of hands, how many people here genuinely like to sell? Show of hands. Okay, good. How many people, when I say the word sales, you get a knot in your stomach? See, that's when you ask the average American, average person, sell something or drink a bottle of Clorox, and half of them would go for the Clorox. But the truth of it is, has anybody here ever met a 5-year-old that couldn't sell? If you haven't had that experience, I'll loan you my 3-year-old and 10-year-old. But the truth is, it's a critical skill. If you want to build wealth, if you want to build a business, got to be able to sell and be able to attract a great team, set a code of honor, a set of rules in place so that you make sure that everybody's on the same agenda. How many people have ever been part of a group where everybody had their own agenda? You see, and one of the things that's held Rich Dad together all these years is that Robert, Sharon, Kim, myself, all the advisors have a very strict code, set of rules, what it takes to be on the team.
So I'll give a plug to an organization that's called the Network Marketing Industry. Some people call it multi-level and all this. And I wrote a book to support them. I'm not in the business. I don't make my money that way. But it's called The Business School for People Who Want to Help People. And the main reason I recommend network marketing is I had the benefit of going to the Xerox Corporation to learn how to sell, professional sales training. Most people don't have that ability. So a network marketing company, they're training you to be a business owner. And the number one skill they train you in is how to sell, how to communicate. They don't like to say that because most people have this negative attitude towards it, but it's a great training ground. The problem with getting a job with Xerox is if you can't sell, they fire you. And one of the things about network marketing companies, if you can't sell, at least they'll work with you. But you have to put in your 2 bits here. So that's why I wrote this book, The Business School, and support an industry that's actually teaching the same skills my rich dad said were important to me with business skills. So if you're going to move from E to S to B and I think you have to learn how to sell. And I'm a very shy person, but I actually learned how to do that. So thank you, Blair. The last 2 people I want to bring up, I'm going to bring up Sharon and Garrett really quickly because they do this little shtick for me, which is important. And the reason I want them up here is the big mistake that people make is they take legal advice from accountants and then they take accounting advice from attorneys. So. Would you talk about that?
Well, Garrett got a head start earlier because he was up here without me, and I was itching to come up and protect the accounting profession. It is absolutely essential that you get the right advice from the right advisor. It sounds simple, but there are accountants that do tell you to do everything on your Schedule C. Find a new accountant. I couldn't agree more. They are not helping you protect your family's future.
If they say to you, become a sole proprietorship or a partnership, find a new person. They're giving you bad asset protection advice, right?
That's absolutely correct. But your accountant and your tax advisors are essential to allow you to build your business in the right direction from a tax perspective. Attorneys should not be telling you how to do your taxes. You have to use the right advisor for the right advice and find a good advisor who will give you good advice. Both very important skills. You don't want me doing your legal work, guaranteed. These days you probably don't want me doing your tax work either. It's been a while since I did a tax return. But you must get competent tax advice. It helps you grow your business quicker. Many of you in this room right now are paying too much in taxes because you're not getting competent tax advice. I did, even and I knew this stuff. Got excellent tax advice, and we were able to structure ourselves in a better format to save income tax because there are only a few people that can stay current on everything. Exactly the same way. Garrett came to us and said, you need to change where you're doing your incorporations. Wyoming is now the place you need to be going. I'm not going to argue with him. He's the expert. Thank you, Garrett, because it protects us. And when I have somebody come up at events and talk to me and ask me legal questions, I send them to Garrett. And when Garrett has somebody come up and ask tax questions, I think he sends them to me. Your turn.
You're absolutely right, Sharon. You don't want me doing your tax return. Please, I am not a tax attorney. I don't do taxes, but I do work really well with CPAs and people who understand the tax system. And that's what you want to do. That's one of Robert's messages. It's a team sport. Business and investing are a team sport, and 2 of the key members of your team are going to be your attorney and your CPA. And what I do in my practice is frequently I will get on the phone with the client, the CPA, and myself, and we'll have everybody there on the same phone call. We don't need to be in the same room. In some cases, we're talking on a conference call with people spread around the country. But you need to have those 3 people on the phone at the same time. What happens so often, and Sharon, you've seen this, is an attorney will say, that's a tax question, go talk to your CPA. And the CPA will say, well, that's a legal question, go talk to your attorney. And you play this phone tag game, and nothing ever gets done. So by having everybody on the phone at the same time, in as little as half an hour, you can make decisions and move forward to protect your assets and to save on taxes. It's a great way to go.
So if I could, in conclusion, I would say, if you're an E or an S, all you need is financial planners, and that's about it. And exactly as Scott McPherson says, they're going to sell you stocks, bonds, savings, mutual funds, and get out of debt, because that's all they can sell you. Over here, these are my advisors. I don't have a financial planner per se. What I am is a B and an I, and I play the game a little bit differently. So if you're going to be successful, I strongly suggest knowing the differences there. Because every time I meet a financial planner, they always tell me the same thing. Work hard, save money, get out of debt, invest for long term, and diversify, and naturally buy stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and things like that, because that's what they sell. And if you're going to be an active investor, you need a different team than people who are passive investors. Is that true?
Absolutely. And if I could just add one little piece of just incredibly good path to follow, is you want to find somebody who is an advisor who has already done for another client what you have done. You don't want to have them learning on your dime. As we have grown more successful, we've had to change certain advisors because we needed advisors who had already been there and had clients bigger than us. You don't want to be that advisor's largest client, because what you're doing is you're paying them to research, not paying them for their knowledge and experience. And it's very important that you make sure your advisors have the expertise in the area that you want to build your business or your personal life.
As I got wealthier, I had to change my advisors and things like this, so I pay more, but their advice is more important. If you're poor, any advice will do. Okay. So that's the big difference here. So let's have a big hand for our advisors. I'm going to go into right now what I think is a very important subject for any investor, and that is one of the ways I make a lot of money is watching this right here. It's a thing called trends. And as I said, I didn't do well in school most of the time because I was bored, but there was two subjects I really enjoyed in school. One of them was history, which is trending, and second was wood shop. And when most of my classmates were building salad bowls for Mom, I built an 8-foot El Toro sailboat, and that's how I got an A for that. But I'm going to be talking to you today about what I consider one of the biggest trends and why America, and not only America, but many of the world right now, we have this massive problem between poor and poverty and this growing gap between the haves and have-nots. But I'd like to show you the shift in the world today from socialism to capitalism. So let's go back in time. In 1929, the stock market crashed. This affected my mom and dad because it led to the Depression. So how many people know people who grew up during the Depression? How many people know them because they wanted job security and pensions? Really, really a lot. And that's really affected their thinking. So then 1929, after that, led to 1933, and it led to the New Deal, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he came out with the New Deal in Social Security. Interestingly enough, in 1933, Hitler came to power also. Now this is why it's so important. As I said, right now, savers are losing their savings. The reason this is so important is because Hitler came to power because the middle class had their savings wiped out. And the same thing is happening right now, is that if 401ks and pensions don't work and savings don't work, it may bring rise to another type of political party. So in 1933, two guys were elected, FDR, Hitler. And the other thing that's interesting is on the cash flow game, as I said, in 1933, this is what they formed here, was called I call the fast track. And in 1933, a man named Joseph Kennedy, father of John Kennedy, created this here, investments only for the rich here, because they wanted to separate the poor and middle class from getting into the better investments or the riskier investments. So that's why 1933 is a very important year. The next year is 1943, as we said, the Current Tax Payment Act. Because we were in World War II at the time, and the federal government needed so much money,
last year of secondary school principals, administrators, and I had a man come up to the table to our booth, and he was livid. He was a principal of school. He says, "This is what's wrong with our school system. We're playing games. We should be teaching them reading and writing and arithmetic." And I'm going, please play it. The same guy now has ordered games for his district. So again, reading and writing is at the bottom, and that's still what we're doing in our school system. At the very top, doing the real thing, taking action, doing the real thing in life. And what's right below it? Simulating the real thing, playing the game, playing cash flow. When I saw this, I stopped the meeting we were having at Arizona State University, called Robert and said, "Robert, you will not believe what I've just seen. This is going to be the beginning, the middle, and the end of Teach to Be Rich, because it validates his life of teaching."
As I said, games, I mean, I saw a completely different world playing Monopoly. You know, by just playing Monopoly, suddenly I saw the way that I could become rich. And it had nothing to do with school and all this. It's not to say that reading and lecture are not important, but it's to say this is the way we learn the most. You know, I've learned by playing games. And then right before that is real life. So that's why we recommend you play the cash flow game 3 or 4 times and teach it to 10 people before you start playing with real life money. The last thing I want to say about real life is this. One of the reasons A students are not successful in the real world, not all of them, but a lot of them aren't, is because what they learn in school down here is not to make mistakes. So they're really afraid of the real world, and they stay in the corporate world, the world of academia. How many people know people who went to school at age 5 and they're still in school today? You know, that was my poor dad. He only did well in school, so he stayed there. He had no idea what the real world was about because he was afraid of making mistakes. So that's how it affects the whole thing. So when you read, when you get this book here, you can study this cone of learning right now, but you can see the worst ways of learning are reading and lecture, and the best ways of playing games and by doing the real thing. And that's why we created the cash flow game, was to not only for you to learn, but to help other people learn. Because when you play a game, it's mental, emotional, physical, as well as spiritual learning. Because it involves all of your senses. So
it's also why this product, Teach to Be Rich, is going to be a larger book. It's going to include the DVDs that we are recording with you today. It's because we want to walk the talk. It's experiential learning. And experiential learning is simulating the real thing and then doing it and learning from your mistakes.
Yeah. I'd like to bring one of my best friends, Blair Singer, because you have a son who's like me in school, right?
Yeah, Ben.
Yeah. Why don't you tell him what's happened to him?
Well, Ben is one of these 10-year-old boys in school that have a hard time sitting still. Has anybody here ever met one? And as a result of that, he's had difficulty in some of the traditional reading, writing, and math stuff at school. As a result, we've had him play, we played cash flow game with him, the kids version, but he got a little bored with that and decided that he wanted to play the adult version. And I have to tell you right now that my son Ben has probably played the cash flow adult version of the game at least 20 or 25 times. He typically gets out of the rat race in about 20 minutes.
Most adults takes 4 hours if ever.
Takes 4 hours. But what's interesting about it is here was a kid who had a hard time with reading, special programs, the teachers had concern, problems with math, all of this stuff. But what he learned in the cash flow game is he now, when doing the financial statements, we actually took the financial statement to his reading coach, and they said, who wrote this out for him? They go, he did it. Because he's doing it, his writing is legible, his math is perfect. He went from I didn't tell you this, he actually went from doing, he's in 5th grade, went from doing 4th grade level math, he's not doing 7th grade level math because it has relevance to him now. And True. But the biggest win, here's a kid who really had, as all 10-year-olds, really their view of themselves is very, very important. And sometimes when he gets a little beat up on the soccer field or a little bit beat up by the kids that are supposedly smarter, he comes back and he wants to play the cash flow game. Because out of the cash flow game, in listening to us talk, he takes his allowance money and he goes out and he buys silver.
He saves silver, not currency.
Not currency. And so what happens is he comes back and because it's friends that did something to him, and he goes, but they don't have silver. So, some people say that, about money and self-esteem and all that stuff, but what we observe, my wife Eileen and I observe with our son, is his ability to really manifest something through this game in the real world has done light years for his self-esteem. In a world where he's been persecuted because he wasn't smart enough, not attentive enough, too good of a salesperson, so he's considered disruptive in school if you're a good salesperson, is that he found a place where, as you talk about, that he has financial genius. And in working with his class, and we do a couple events there, he actually stood in front of the room in front of 50 4th, 5th, and 6th graders and explained to them the purpose of knowing your math, because if you bought silver at $7.25 and now it's $8.50, how much money did I make? He says in front of the room. Right. So that's a testimony to games in a world where reading and lecture has always been prized. Is you got to handle that first. And in the case of Ben, the game comes first.
Right. So thank you. That's what I do. So again, that's why I created this product. But I'd like to end with this thought. And my thought is this, that every single one of us has a genius. Okay? And as I said earlier, it was only until I went to school that I think I was stupid. I didn't know I was stupid until I went to school, and the teacher started labeling me that. And I started looking at that, I said, this is really quite, ridiculous. And it was my rich dad again who really kind of helped me with it and all this. He says, there's people with different kinds of geniuses, but we all have one. Let me say it this way. Every animal has a special advantage. For instance, a cheetah can run fast, a bird can fly, and a cockroach you cannot kill. Everything... Every one of God's creatures has a special genius, something unique that's for them. So if a cockroach has one, why not you? That's the way I look at it. So my poor dad, who was a school teacher, also said to me, my poor dad didn't like school either. He was trying to protect their genius. He says, what the word genius comes from is genie in us. It's that magic. It's where we do something that's different than everybody else. And I want to say this much, for me personally, my genius, if I could say this, my genius did not come out in school. It was crushed in school. I do not do well with reading and lecture. Also, my genius does not come out in the corporate world. I do not like climbing the corporate ladder. I don't like to say hello, yes sir, no sir, I'll do as you tell me, sir. I don't like what they pay me. I don't like their benefit plans. So my genius didn't do well in the corporate world. Some people do. The definition of intelligence is for you to be smart enough or intelligent enough to find that spot in the world where your genius comes out. And let me explain that. Your genius is dependent upon the environment you're in. As I said, my genius didn't do well in school and didn't do well in the corporate world. My genius does well on the street. My genius does well in real estate. I do well as an entrepreneur, but not as a corporate guy. I don't get along with them too well. I'm a different kind of character. Does that make sense to you? So we can understand this. Tiger Woods has a genius. But Tiger Woods' genius comes out in the environment of the golf course. You ever watch that guy pick up the club? That's where his genius comes out. If he was a jockey, he would not be a genius there. So you have to find the environment where your genius comes out, because every one of us has one. Mick Jagger went to school to be an accountant. But he found his genius as a what? Rolling Stone. And so the message I want to leave with each and every one of you is that you have a genius. If you look at this picture up here on the plasma, see, every child has one. It's that magic. It's that thing that they know that nobody else knows. It's that special gift that every child is born with. And the problem with school is it crushes the genius of kids who do not respond well to reading and lecture. So if you look at it this way, this here is what your environment looks like. Like I said, I didn't do well in school. I didn't do well in the corporate world, but I do well on the streets. I do well in real estate. I don't do well in picking stocks. I don't do well with bonds. I don't do well with mutual funds. That's not where my genius lies. So your job, ladies and gentlemen, is have the courage and the wherewithal to go out and find that spot in the world when you rub the magic lamp, your environment, your genius comes out. Where that is, I don't know, but may you have the courage to find it. If you do as our school system teaches you, which is to go to school and look for a safe, secure what? Job, work hard, save money, get out of debt, diversify, and invest for the long term, you'll probably never find your genius. Does that make sense, you guys here? So may you find your genius, because each and every one of you has it. It is only crushed when you don't have the courage to find it. It doesn't mean your genius is easy to find. Look at Tiger Woods. He busts his you-know-what to find his genius. Look at Oprah Winfrey. You know, she's been in front of television and she works really hard to be successful at that. Too many people think that just because it's your genius, it should be easy. Lazy people really don't get ahead. I have no respect for lazy people because I'm among the laziest people I know. I never thought that my genius would lie in education because I hated school so much. But the moment I started to teach outside the system, I noticed that people's lives were changing. But not just that, I'm not saying I'm the best teacher, but I make more money than most teachers. And so the world will reward you if you have the courage to give your gift, your genius. Does that make sense, you guys here? It's very, very important. So in closing, if I could say this, that I'm not saying do real estate. And I'm not saying do what do you call that? Entrepreneurship. But some of you may find your genius as an employee. Some of you may find it as a self-employed person. Mine just happened to be over here. Because a guy named Jim Cramer on CNBC, his genius is picking stocks. That guy is a genius at that. He shouldn't do real estate. Buffett says, why should I do real estate when stocks are so easy? So the point here, ladies and gentlemen, just don't follow blindly like a pack of sheep. Invest for the long term, diversify, save money, get out of debt, and turn your money over to so-called experts. You have a genius, so does your children, so the people around you. The reason I want you to play the cash flow game and study is so that you can find your genius. But like I said, it takes some work for it to come out because you have a gift. The most important thing is find out what really works for you, not what I say. Does that make sense, you guys here? So rub that magic lamp, that environment. It could be in church. It could be as a poet. It could be as a gardener. Who cares? It's where your genius comes out. And when you find that, I think you'll find your life more abundant and happier. There's nothing worse than somebody who's working because their parents told them to do it or because you make a lot of money at it. That's when people go postal. You know, they have a job security with the post office department. And they really cannot stand it because they've bought somebody else's program here. So, as I said, I'm not pushing stocks, bonds, real estate, entrepreneurship, and all this. But really, my whole message is just find that genius. Because as Warren Buffett, the world's greatest investor, says, it's a very important quote. Happily, there's more than one way to get to financial heaven. And ladies and gentlemen, may you find that way that works best for you. Thank you very much.